Chapter 1850. The voice that had stopped Emolian earlier rang out again. Princess of the Pangu clan of the Aurora Sandland requests an audience with His Highness the Crown Prince of the Divine Land. Emolian did not even turn her head. Seventh Yan's speed was also very fast. In a moment, the carriage was far behind them. The corner of Dao Wuji's mouth twitched. He coughed lightly and said, "Boss, she's chasing after us." Fairy Ginkgo glared at him and snorted. "What? You fancy her? We haven't even met yet. You haven't even seen her face yet. You're already thinking about her?" Dao Wuji rolled his eyes and said exasperatedly, "What are you talking about? Although I want to marry a few more wives after I come out, do you think I can fancy someone like Princess Jing? She's so fierce. I might kill her before I even marry her. Between a woman and my life, I'd rather choose my own life." Fairy Ginkgo glanced at him disdainfully. "She's just a little girl. Look at how scared you are. Useless guy. How can she be so powerful?" Dao Wuji was a spiritual paragon. A little girl who could reach the 7th level of the divine realm at such a young age was already very impressive. Dao Wuji rubbed his chin. "Teach only a little girl is interesting? Do you think I'll find a 100-year-old man like you?" Fairy Ginkgo flew into a rage and threw a punch at Dao Wuji's face. "Who are you calling a 100-year-old man?" Dao Wuji pursed his lips and looked at Fairy Ginkgo and Fairy Mutant pitifully. "Can you two stop pretending to be young? The two of you are over 300 years old. What? You won't allow me to call you old men? On the Divine Land, even a useless ordinary person's average age could reach over 200 years old, let alone cultivators. Naturally, their lifespans were even longer. Princess Jing was only 27 or 28 years old. She could only be called a little girl. Compared to Fairy Peony and Fairy Ginkgo who were over 100 years old, there was a big difference in age. Fairy Ginkgo spat at Dao Wuji's face. "Watch your words. Are you asking for a beating?" She hated it when people talked about her age. Of course, which woman in the world liked it when people called her old? With Dao Wuji's despicable appearance, he would be beaten up no matter where he went. Limitless Blade could only snort, looking like he was at his wit's end. He shrugged at Fairy Ginkgo. Alright, just take it that I said something wrong. You're as beautiful as a flower, and you're still young." "Of course." Fairy Ginkgo glanced at him, twirling her small orchid fingers and snorting, "That Princess Jing, who goes in and out of the battlefield with a group of men, killing enemies everywhere. How gentle and demure can she be? She's obviously a tigress." Dao Wuji felt as if the girl he admired had been destroyed. He couldn't help but argue with her. "How can you do that? You haven't even seen Princess Jing's face. How can you slander her like this? That's not very good." The Ginkgo fairy touched her own face. "Can that kind of little girl be more beautiful than me?" Dao Wuji was helpless. He turned to look at the silent little Tai Sui and asked curiously, "Little Tai Sui, why aren't you saying anything?" Little Tai Sui didn't even bother to pay attention to him and just threw him a cold look. Dao Wuji couldn't help but feel aggrieved. He sighed softly and looked away. Every time he talked to little Tai Sui, he would get angry after a few sentences. Why? Chapter 1851. "Your Highness, please wait." A cold voice came into everyone's ears. He saw a few flying white horses spread their wings and swept across the sky, quickly chasing after them. Of course, the flying horses were not as fast as the golden dragon, but the woman on the flying horses used her divine power to speed up and caught up in just a few minutes. Fairy Ginkgo turned her head to look and saw a woman in a red dress with delicate features. She was riding on the wind and clouds. Under the red cloak, her black hair was like a waterfall, her eyes were like stars, and her eyebrows were like crescent moons. Her face was cold and elegant. Her otherworldly temperament made people gasp in admiration. How could there be such an otherworldly woman in the world? She was like a piece of jade made by the heavens. Behind her, there were 4 or 5 flying horses. On each flying horse, there was a beautiful maid. They seemed to be the personal maids of Princess Jing. Compared to the maids of ordinary families, these women had a more valiant and formidable aura. They looked extraordinarily valiant and intimidating. These maids were all dressed gorgeously and had swords on their waists. The hilts of the swords were inlaid with all kinds of gems and agates. They would make Princess Jing proud if she brought them out. People might even believe that they were ladies of noble families. Princess Jing took the lead. She activated her divine power and quickly approached the golden dragon. She saluted the crown prince from afar. "Your Highness, Your Highness." However, the crown prince ignored her. The back of his head was facing her. He didn't even turn around. Princess Jing didn't get angry. Instead, she leaped into the sky and landed in front of the golden dragon, blocking its path. "Your Highness, please wait." Dao Wuji and the Luo brothers beside him looked at each other. Prince Emo treated her so coldly, but Princess Jing still followed him. She was indeed a heroine. Emo Lien frowned. He looked very impatient. He glanced at Princess Jing coldly and said, "Jing Linyao of the Pangu clan in the Aurora Sandland." This sentence was said without any emotion. There was a hint of mockery in his tone. Just like Princess Jing and most of the other people in the world, they were all cats and dogs that were not worthy of being remembered by Prince Emo. That's right. Princess Jing was calm. Even if she heard the sarcasm in the crown prince's voice, she didn't care. She nodded slightly, raised her hand, and threw a thin piece of paper in Emo Lien's direction. However, Emo Lien didn't reach out to take it, nor did he even glance at it. A purple flame directly landed on that piece of paper, burning it to ashes on the spot. Princess Jing was stunned. The maids behind her were also stunned. They all looked at the crown prince with an ugly expression. "Your Highness actually burned His Majesty's imperial edict," Princess Jing said calmly, as if what Emo Lien burned was not an imperial edict, but a piece of paper. Prince Emo turned on his mocking mode and said nonchalantly, "It's just a random thing, I don't want to see it." Princess Jing smiled faintly. "Perhaps the crown prince should find a place to talk with me." Prince Emo glanced at her and said coldly, "Little Seven." Little Seven immediately understood. She could tell that her master was in a bad mood. She didn't dare to wait any longer. She immediately flew out. Princess Jing frowned. She looked at the direction where the crown prince left and remained silent for a long time. Until a maid came up and whispered in her ear, "Your Highness, it's a failure. Tomorrow at 12:30, there's no need to rush. Let's meet tomorrow or the day after." Chapter 1852. Wanlu Town. It was the most prosperous town near Mount Dai Zone. The population of the town had almost exceeded 10,000 people. Usually, people from the surrounding villages would come to Wanlu Town when they needed to trade or buy things. Mount Dai Zone was basically the hunting garden of the Heavenly Academy before it became a place to nurture corpses. The Heavenly Bestowing Academy was the #1 academy in the Poland prefecture. There were at least 30 to 50,000 students, if not 80,000. From the outside, the entire Heaven Bestow Academy seemed to be stationed in a large city near Mount Dai. Wanlu Town was so close to the Heavenly Academy. Usually, the students of the Heavenly Academy could only go to Wanlu Town to play during the holidays. It was not hard to imagine why Wanlu Town was so prosperous in recent years. It was getting late. The people in Wanlu Town were busy packing up their stalls and hurrying home. Jing Linyao walked past in a hurry with 4 or 5 maids in gorgeous clothes. This group of people, from Princess Jing to the maids beside her, were all dressed in bright and beautiful clothes. Wherever they passed by, they would attract the attention of others. Jing Linyao seemed to be immersed in her own thoughts. She did not pay attention to how the people nearby looked at her. "Your Highness, we can only stay in Shuntian Prefecture for less than a month. When the time comes, we must go back immediately. Otherwise, if we are noticed by the heavenly law, we will all be in trouble." A personal maid followed behind Princess Jing and said softly, "Where are they?" Jing Linyao asked in a low voice. "They are in the Shunlai Inn not far ahead." They hurriedly turned a corner and saw the signboard of the Shunlai Inn in front of them. Because Princess Jing and her group of 6 were moving too fast, they almost collided with a group coming from the side. Both parties were going to enter the Shunlai Inn. Princess Jing stopped and frowned at the girl who had entered the inn with her. The girl was about 24 years old. She was wearing a clean blue dress. Her face was not outstanding, but she gave people a good impression of her. Behind her were 5 young girls in the same dress. They all looked at her. Sorry. Princess Jing and the woman leading the group spoke at the same time. They nodded at each other and exchanged some pleasantries before inviting each other to enter. The 2 groups each took a few steps back. Then, Princess Jing nodded at the leader of the other group with a smile and quickly led the maids inside. Princess, they are in the sky room on the 2nd floor. The ordinary-looking woman in her mid-20s glanced at the direction where Jing Linyao went. Then, she called the other 5 women and walked toward a quiet place in the corner of the lobby that was covered by several bonsai plants. Master. Second martial uncle. Second martial uncle. And the group of people called out to each other. Then, the 2 women smiled and gestured for them to sit down. How have you been in the academy recently? The instructors in the academy are all pretty good. The leading girl nodded and said, Master, the 6 of us will fight for a place to go to Dai Zong Mountain this time. If everything goes well, we should be able to pass the preliminary selection. You must be careful. Aunt E looked at the children lovingly and said softly, Where there is life, there is hope. Chapter 1853. We still need to put safety first. Don't worry, Auntie. Our lives won't be sacrificed so easily. Right? We still need to preserve our lives and plan slowly, a round-faced little girl around 19 years old said through clenched fists and gritted teeth. Auntie sighed. 3 years had passed, but the seeds of hatred buried in these young children's hearts were growing stronger and stronger. The past was already in the past, but the grief was even more intense. Even she was unable to let go of the enmity and hatred in her heart, let alone these disciples who were brooding. Yang Shirong looked up and looked outside the window. Under the setting sun, pedestrians hurriedly passed by Wanlu town, which was enveloped in a hazy yellow. 3 years ago, only 200 of the Holy Water sect's 800 disciples survived the massacre, and they fled here like stray dogs. The most important thing was that the Holy Water sect had lost their backbone. The sect master was dead, and eldest senior sister and third junior sister were all dead. Yang Shirong's heart couldn't help but clench every time she thought of how her youngest disciple would feel when she saw the Holy Water sect's former residence covered in ruins. The biggest mistake of all was not to bring the child along with them. She didn't know how she was doing now, but she should be safe. The woman in the lead was Second Peak's senior sister, Yugit. In that battle 3 years ago, countless disciples from the 3 peaks had died, and there were only a few disciples left. Yang Shirong laughed bitterly and downed a cup of tea. She nodded faintly and said, Master is fine. So many years had passed, but every time she thought of the fireworks and wine from that day, she couldn't help but feel bitter in her heart. She never would have expected that the joyous gathering that night was the prelude to the death god's music. Second Ant Master, are the others all right? Third Peak's disciple, Chenhanzi, couldn't resist asking softly. They're all fine. Yang Shirong nodded and looked at the 6 people apologetically. Back then, I sent the 6 of you to Heavenly Bestow Academy to study in order to gather information. These years, we've been apart more than we've been together. Do you blame me for finding it difficult to see each other? The 6 people all shook their heads. They were very clear about their mission. Even in the academy, the 6 people only nodded faintly when they met occasionally and didn't show much intimacy. It was as if they were just the most ordinary students in the academy. Second martial uncle, don't worry. Most of the other students in the academy are doing well. There are 6 other people who are going to Dai Zong Mountain with us. There will be mentors leading the team. When you encounter danger, you can leave Dai Zong Mountain as soon as possible without risking your life. The disciple who spoke was Jiang Qi, a disciple of the First Peak. In reality, most of the First Peak's disciples stayed behind. Jiang Qi was only 14 years old back then, so he and several other younger senior and junior sisters were knocked unconscious by Murong Sun and forced to be taken away by Yang Shirong and the others. Among the 3 peaks, other than Jiang Qi and Lu Ling, who was sitting next to her, the number of disciples from the First Peak who survived was definitely less than 10. At that time, all the First Peak disciples followed Master Murong Sun and eldest senior sister Su Shanshan and stayed behind. Thinking about it now, Jiang Qi couldn't help but cry silently. She probably wouldn't be able to find a master like Murong Sun even if she walked to the end of her life. Come, let's have a cup of tea instead of wine. Although we've only been together for a short time, it's fine as long as we know that we're doing well. Chapter 1854. Aunt E raised her teacup with a smile. Everyone followed suit and drained their cups in one gulp before smiling at each other. The Holy Water Sect's 800 disciples were of one mind and one life. As long as they were alive, the Holy Water Sect would be alive. Tap 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 tap. The group of valiant maidservants followed Princess Jing to the second floor and arrived at the door of Heavenly Room Number 1. Just as they reached the door, they heard smashing cups and screaming curses coming from inside. Princess Jing's footsteps paused, and she frowned slightly. The maidservants also revealed disdainful expressions, as if they were already used to the people inside acting like this. When Jing Linyao pushed open the door and entered, the three women inside the room all turned to look at her. A slightly older woman, who was dressed very gracefully and elegantly, was currently sitting on an armchair. She couldn't help but frown when she saw Jing Linyao. Two young women were standing and sitting on either side of her. One of them had a green silk sash around her waist and a jasper hanging from it. She was no more than 20 years old and had arched brows, almond-shaped eyes, and rosy cheeks. However, her angry expression ruined her pretty face. The other woman looked to be around 27 or 28 years old. She held a round fan in her hand and wore a camellia gray dress with golden threads. Her face paled in comparison to the other two women in the room, and she could only be considered a delicate beauty. "Why did you come in without knocking?" the older woman asked in a low voice. Her stern eyes landed on Jing Linyao, and her expression contained some dissatisfaction. "Greetings, mother." Jing Linyao calmly bowed and then signaled to the maidservants behind her with her eyes. The two maids immediately walked forward and pulled up the beautiful woman who was sitting on the stool. Without any explanation, they gave her 2 slaps on the face. "Ah!" that woman screamed. Because she was restrained by the 2 maidservants, she didn't fall to the ground. She only felt a burning pain on her cheeks, and she opened her mouth to scream. The 2 maids did not hesitate and slapped her twice more, blocking the woman's screams in her mouth. "Impudent." Madame Jing was so angry that she was trembling all over. She jumped out of the armchair and pointed at Jing Linyao with a trembling finger, panting heavily. "Jing Linyao." Her voice sounded like it was coming out from between her teeth. Her face was full of anger. "Mother, my little sister is not sensible. If you don't discipline her, I can only discipline her on your behalf." Jing Linyao said faintly. "I've already warned her not to do anything." Jing Linyao coldly looked at the woman whose cheeks were swollen as if she was looking at a dirty bug. Her eyes were full of disdain. What did this idiot do? Did she think that no one would be able to find out about the stupid things she did? To walk out of the Aurora Sand and the boundless desert, the Pangu clan had to bow to the divine land. Jing Linyao's voice was cold. "I can give the engagement to my younger sister." She had sworn that she would dedicate her life to the Pangu clan instead of getting married. Therefore, marriage would probably have nothing to do with her in this life. But can't you guys be a little smarter? Doing so is already deceiving the great emperor of the divine prefecture. Now you still want to make it known to the whole city? If she continues to be so stupid— Jing Linyao's eyes suddenly turned cold. "I don't mind killing her." Chapter 1855. Jing Linyao slammed the door and walked out of the room, leaving behind Madame Jing, who was trembling with anger and whose lips were somewhat pale, Jing Minyao, who was sobbing, and Jing Qiao, who had nothing to do with this matter. Jing Minyao burst into tears and threw herself into her mother's arms. "Bitch! Bitch! Mother, look at that bitch, how dare she humiliate me like this?" That domineering and arrogant attitude was really disgusting. "Minmin, don't cry." Madame Jing hugged her daughter and comforted her in a low voice. "The most important thing now is to find a way to marry into the Mo family as soon as possible. When the time comes, you will be the crown princess. Even if your elder sister is respected in front of your father, her status will not be comparable to yours." Jing Qiao, who was like air, glanced at the mother and daughter with disgust and then smiled. Mother is right. Little sister, you must not be too sad. Hurry up and get up and let the maids help you reduce the swelling. Don't hurt your face later. Madam Jing nodded. Your second sister is right. Hurry up and get up. Jing Linyao walked out of the sky room of the inn, her cold face slightly gloomy. How many people did that idiot send? Third Mrs. Dog went to gather them. He ordered Sir Chiu to take 200 to 300 people to chase and intercept them. Our people were not able to stop them. It's our fault. Nonsense. Jing Linyao was so angry that she slapped the railing on the second floor. The maids all hung their heads low, not daring to say anything. Xinlan, take some people with you and go there immediately. Remember to make sure that everything is clean. Don't get involved with the Panga clan. Yes, princess. In the entire Panga clan, Jing Linyao was the only one who could make all the clansmen bow their heads and willingly call her princess. As for the second and third daughters of the clan leader, they were all beautiful but useless embroidered pillows. Usually, everyone called them second Miss and third Mississippi. Jing Linyao returned to her room and sat on a chair. She pinched her eyebrows tiredly. The speed of the sand sinking was very fast. In the first half of this year alone, their clan had lost a lot of clansmen and animals because of the sinking of the sand. Many people fell down with the sand in their sleep and did not struggle at all. If this continued, the entire Panga clan would be wiped out by the harsh living environment of the Aurora Desert. They could not stay silent like this. They had to walk out of the desert and go to the Divine Land. The Panga clan had nearly 200,000 clansmen. If so many people wanted to go to the Divine Land at once, it would be impossible without first negotiating with the emperor. However, the result of the negotiation was that the Panga clan had to hand over 20,000 elite soldiers and leave the only son of the clan leader behind as a hostage in the imperial capital of the Divine Land. The emperor of the Divine Land promised that Qingyue, the closest city to the desert, would be allocated to the members of the Panga clan. However, the amount of offerings that had to be made every year was also a huge headache for them. The Panga clan wanted to migrate, but the Panga clan did not want to die. According to the plan of the Emperor of the Divine Land, in a few years, the Panga clan's temperament would be smoothed out, and the entire clan would probably become a vassal of the Divine Land. Jing Linyao put her hand on her aching forehead and sighed. Princess, a maid said in a low voice. Chapter 1856. Can we really do this? Won't it anger the emperor? The edict only says that the daughter of the leader of the Panga clan is marrying the crown prince of the Divine Land. It doesn't mention me by name, so it's not a violation of the edict. Jing Linyao said calmly. The maids looked at each other and were speechless for a moment. In fact, they all knew that the emperor of the Divine Land valued Princess Jing's talent, cultivation and means. Although the edict didn't specify which daughter of the leader it was, but Princess Jing was the eldest daughter of the first wife. Her eldest daughter was unmarried, but her youngest sister was marrying the crown prince of the Divine Land. It didn't make sense. If the emperor knew that he was tricked, he might be angry. Jing Linyao sneered, didn't the crown prince burn the emperor's edict? I've long known that the crown prince is not an easy person to get along with. I just wanted to do business with him, but he... The maidservant sighed. That's right. That willful crown prince didn't even have the mood to look at the edict. He directly set it on fire. Such an unexpected method is really amazing. Princess Jing picked up a cup of tea and drank it all. Then she threw the cup on the table and smiled happily. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Help me make an appointment with Prince Mo and tell him that I have a business with him. I'm sure he'll be very interested in the business I discussed with him. When the maids saw this, they nodded and respectfully retreated one after another. After closing the door, a slightly older maid sighed softly and said, I don't know if the princess will regret today's decision many years later. Today, they had all seen that His Highness Crown Prince Mo. He was simply a handsome man that was hard to come by in 1,000 years. From the bottom of their hearts, they felt that such a man was a good match for their Princess Jing. If they could really work together, they would be invincible when the strong work together. Unfortunately, that wasn't Princess Jing's goal. Although Jing Linyao didn't know what the maids were thinking, She could guess what they were thinking when she saw the slight regret in their eyes. Prince Mo was indeed the second most outstanding man she had seen in her life. The first time she saw such an outstanding man was 3 years ago, during the desert storm. Since then, although she would occasionally remember this man, it was only occasionally. She was a woman who was born to shoulder the fate of the entire Pangu clan. She didn't need to rely on men. The military forces she had now were all built up by herself over the past 10 years. She had ambition and desire, but all of this was based on the fact that she had to fight for it. She believed that one day she would be able to achieve her wish. But before that day came, she had to lay low. Whether it was Jing Qiyao or Jing Minyao, those little ants, they were just a cornerstone for her grand plan. She, Jing Linyao, never needed to rely on a man to live. With a mocking smile, Jing Linyao swept away the tent and lay down. After chasing Prince Mo for half a day today, she felt very tired. She had to lie down and think about how she should proceed in the future. Thorns and bumps were just a trial in life. In the end, all of this would turn into a field of flowers that bloomed for her. Chapter 1857. On the other side of the forest. Although the fire was strong, Arbor didn't feel any discomfort as she was surrounded by a ring of fire. Standing within the wall of fire, he used a pair of cold eyes to stare at the bearded old man whose expression changed slightly through the raging flames. A talisman floated into Arbor's hand on its own. Whoosh! She was instantly lost in the fire. The old man started and quickly turned his head to see the girl standing on a tree branch. The ferrule in her hand turned into a streak of light as she slammed it towards the back of his head. The bearded old man laughed coldly, thinking that the girl in front of him was incomparably naive. She was clearly only at the beginning of the spirit realm, but she dared to be so bold in front of him, a worshipper who was already halfway into the spirit realm. This was simply laughable. Die. The bearded old man's eyebrows furrowed as he reached out to grab the girl's neck. The fierce whistling of the wind came from the sky, but Xiao Mu did not even crease her brows. Faster than words could tell, the water spirit in Arbor's hand gurgled out from between her fingers and suddenly condensed into a ball of ice and snow, hurtling towards the old man's heart. Haha! The old man laughed wantonly, his face full of mockery. Do you think that the ice and snow you condense can hurt this old man's hair? Bam! He didn't dodge at all and simply opened his chest, allowing the ball of ice and snow to explode on his chest. He didn't even furrow his brow as his hand reached out to Arbor's neck, only an inch away. He was about to grab Arbor's slender neck in his hand. Suddenly, a stone landed on the bearded old man's head, causing him to feel pain at the back of his head. His eyes widened slightly. At the same time, Arbor flung a talisman at the bearded old man's chest. As soon as the talisman came close to his chest, it suddenly exploded with a cold light. A sudden chill seemed to have seeped into his internal organs, causing the bearded old man's entire body to stiffen. His entire body suddenly shivered. How could this be? He didn't know that the ice and snow in Arbor was just a test. The water talisman was the main point. The water spirit talisman exploded when it got close to the bearded old man, and all the cold air it contained seeped into his body. This person had comprehended the fire spiritual energy. Once the chill entered his body, it would naturally cause damage to his body. Just as this old man froze, a trace of redness faintly surfaced in Xiao Mu's eyes. Several large trees behind her were abruptly uprooted and swept up, smashing into the old man with a boom. Following that, the startled swan dagger slashed through the air. It was incomparably fast and pierced through the old man's shoulder in an instant, causing him to howl in anger. Great! A clap came from the top of the tree. Arbor looked up and saw an old man with a brandy nose sitting on the treetop with his legs crossed and gulping down a mouthful of wine. Grandpa? Arbor was slightly stunned. The brandy-nosed old man chuckled and lifted the bearded old man who fell to the ground with one hand. He waved at Arbor and said, "Little girl, I'll take care of this old man for you. Today's matter, let's turn it into a small matter and turn it into nothing, okay?" Arbor was expressionless, but a hint of displeasure appeared on his paralyzed face. "You know who they are?" The old man raised his head slightly and looked into the distance. He laughed and said, "How would this old man know who they are? All right, I won't hinder you two from meeting. This old man will leave first." HM. Chapter 1858. A confinement glyph array suddenly landed around the rose-nosed old man. Arbor said coldly, "Put him down and leave." The old man carried the bearded old man with his right hand and turned to look pitifully at Arbor. He lifted the wine gourd with his left hand and gulped down 2 more mouthfuls. "Little girl, where it's possible to make mistakes, one should spare them." 5 or 6 confinement glyph arrays landed around the rose-nosed old man one after another. Arbor's face was as cold as ice. He said expressionlessly, "Put him down and leave." The old man was at his wit's end. He sighed and looked at her with a serious expression. "Actually, this old man just doesn't want you to get involved in this mess. You're still young. The road ahead is long. At this time, you're still very insignificant in the eyes of some people. Those people are not people you can afford to offend." "The divine lands?" Arbor said coldly. "So what?" The rose-nosed old man was startled. He looked her up and down. "Little girl, don't be too stubborn. This old man is doing this for your own good." "No need." Arbor refused coldly. There was no room for negotiation in his tone. "Put him down. Otherwise, I won't rest until I'm dead." The old man, this damn child's temper was really unlikable. The bearded old man took 2 steps back. He looked up at the sky behind Arbor and said to Arbor helplessly, "Little girl, I'm sorry. Today, I must take this person away." Then he punched at the confinement glyph set up by Arbor. With this punch, the first confinement glyph immediately collapsed. But what made the old man depressed and speechless was that with a wave of Arbor's hand, more than 10 confinement glyph arrays reinforced his surroundings. In addition to the previous 5 or 6 confinement glyph arrays. Fuck, where did you get so many glyph arrays? "I have all the time in the world," Arbor said coldly. At most, he would just drag it out. The rose-nosed old man's glyph arrays were not as easy to break as he appeared to be. Let's see how many glyph arrays he could break in one go. Arbor took out the gold-beaded talisman pen from his conscience and drew a confinement talisman in the air. Today, he must leave his life behind. "You want to help me? Then don't leave either." Arbor's face darkened as he coldly shouted. His voice was so cold that even the old man with rosacea couldn't help but tremble slightly. This child was really a stubborn person. A few minutes after Duan Muqing and Jinren arrived, they saw Zhou Danjin rushing over with an anxious expression. Seeing that the 2 of them were fine, he could not help but let out a sigh of relief. The old man with rosacea couldn't help but smile bitterly. He thought to himself that today's matter was really not going to end well. Arbor's speed of drawing talismans was really fast. Just as the old man smashed 2 more talisman arrays, Arbor had finished drawing 2 more sets of talisman arrays and directly threw them to the old man's side. While the old man with rosacea was cursing in his heart, he couldn't help but sigh. If such a talisman genius were to go to the Divine Prefecture's Mu clan, he would definitely be worshipped, right? Arbor concentrated on drawing talismans and entered a state of complete selflessness in the blink of an eye. At this moment, he only felt that there were talismans in front of him, and he could draw as he pleased. In the eyes of others, the speed at which he drew talismans could no longer be called abnormal, but crazy. The old man with rosacea's expression became slightly serious. At this rate, not only would he not be able to break the glyph arrays around him, but he would also be heavily confined within them. Chapter 1859. Those who wanted to take her life would have to be one step ahead of her and leave their lives for her. No one knew how much she valued her life and her body. This level could be called abnormal. After he had lost everything, he had seen his own limbs wither away, and then he had regained all of this. Apart from herself, no one could understand her feelings of regaining what she had lost. She cherished and loved her body very much. She didn't even want to have the slightest scar on her body. No one could try to take her life. No one could. When Qi Xianxian, the little fatty, and Mata arrived, they vaguely saw a burst of bright light erupting from the little fellow's body. It was as if something in her body had broken through the shackles and reached the sky. The red-nosed old man, who was trying his best to break through the confinement glyph array, looked in the direction of Arbor with a dumbfounded expression. This girl, sheeted in the depths of her consciousness that no one could see, the golden talisman jade tome opened the 8th jade slip and introduced Arbor to a wider world, learning the art of talisman drawing. The advancement of her talisman master level caused her spiritual sense to rise to the 7th level. She didn't have time to look at the several new talismans she had just learned. She only glanced at the doppelganger talisman. Her heart moved slightly, and she saw a demonstration talisman floating out from the hidden jade slip, Ghost Summoning Talisman. Ghost Summoning Talisman, could it be that it could summon a powerful ghost spirit into the world? But she had always been a person who couldn't see ghost spirits. If she summoned a powerful ghost spirit, how would she restrain it? After all, it was a ghost spirit. Once it went out of control, it would become a crisis and affect the world. That wouldn't be good. She had never been a good person, but she had never thought of harming others. After putting away the ghost summoning talisman, she discovered that the Spirit Division Record's Soul Chapter had made great progress. After entering the 6th level of the Soul Chapter, while forging the 6th branch meridian, the biggest benefit should be that she could control her spiritual sense to draw talismans for her in her consciousness. However, she calculated that with her current spiritual sense, she could control her spiritual sense for about 4 hours at most. After all, she couldn't let her spiritual sense dry up just to urge her spiritual sense to draw talismans. Although her spiritual sense recovery process was many times faster than others, she still had to pay attention to prevent her spiritual sense from being damaged. When Wei Wei, Instructor Hu, and the other 3 who had rushed over saw this scene, they could not help but be stunned. Even though they knew the little girl was an extremely outstanding Grand Talisman Master, the scene they witnessed with their own eyes had practically overturned their understanding of Grand Talisman Masters. They thought that when great Talisman Masters drew talismans, they would burn incense in seclusion and concentrate wholeheartedly. But now, they saw this young woman standing there and drawing numerous wooden talismans in midair. If they didn't see it with their own eyes, they wouldn't dare believe it even if they were beaten to death. After a set of talisman arrays were completed, they were quickly placed on the body of the old man with rosacea. Before long, they began to sympathize with the old man. Arbor opened her eyes and waved her hand. A doppelganger talisman fell on her body. Subsequently, it was an eye-opener. 2 afterimages rustled out beside the little girl. Each afterimage held the same gold-beaded talisman brush, and their movements were exactly the same as the little girl's. They were both drawing talismans. Everyone was speechless. Why did they feel so sorry for the old man with the rosacea? Why was he so insistent on taking the bearded old man away? Chapter 1860. The old man with the rosacea started to regret his decision. He shouldn't have gotten himself involved in this mess. Looking up, he saw a streak of light appear in the distant horizon. He cursed in his heart. That ancestor had really rushed over. However, it made sense. With such a huge commotion here, as long as one wasn't deaf, they would probably come over to take a look. The red-nosed old man threw out a few punches in a desperate struggle, landing on the confinement array glyphs. His face darkened as he threatened, "Little girl, if you don't stop now, this old man will use his full strength." Arbor's gaze turned cold. With a wave of his hand, the ghost spirit talisman suddenly appeared beside her. Just now, she had already asked the little water baby. As long as she took out the black ghost spirit pearl, even if she couldn't see the strong ghost spirit, she only needed to inject a trace of spiritual power into it. With a thought, she could make the ghost spirit pearl absorb the strong ghost spirit. Even if the ghost spirit was comparable to an immortal supremacy, it wouldn't be able to escape. "I'm going to use all my strength too," Arbor shouted coldly. "If you don't let her go, don't blame me for being heartless to you." Everyone held their breaths. Qi Xianxian only felt a heavy pressure on her body. She felt so stifled that she almost couldn't breathe. The old man with the rosacea was at his wit's end. Who told him to receive the order? Keep. Collect. Cripple. Track. Sigh, he really hated that bunch of women from the Jing clan. He didn't know what they were up to. Could it be that Jing Linyao thought that by casually tossing her retarded stepsister to the crown prince, the emperor could be fooled? The emperor valued Jing Linyao, this woman, and the contributions she had made over the years. The emperor felt that with Jing Linyao's ruthless methods and ability to deal with people, she was worthy of his son. If the Jing clan really dared to toss a retarded stepsister to his son, with the emperor's temperament, the entire Jing clan would probably be exterminated. Thinking about that imperial edict gave him a headache. He had already received news that His Highness had indeed burned his own father's imperial edict without mercy. This father and son pair were like natural enemies. They didn't have good expressions when they met, making things difficult for these old officials. Boom! A thunderous rumble came from the horizon. Along with the dark clouds, the dusk scenery was completely covered by the gloomy and dark clouds. Rosacea Nose's heart trembled slightly. He looked up at the sky and had a bad premonition. This little child wouldn't really want to fight him to the death, right? Why was this girl so stubborn? Rosacea Nose had a headache. In just a few seconds, he saw a huge black shadow appear in the thick black clouds, accompanied by a cold chill, attacking his heart. Holy shit, this dense baleful energy, could it be what he was thinking? Jojo. Arbor's face was cold. After hearing the familiar voice, he was slightly stunned. All of a sudden, they looked up and saw a golden light gliding past their eyes. A golden dragon descended from the sky and transformed into a human. Crown Prince Mo, who was dressed in black, abruptly flitted across the sky like a soaring dragon before landing beside Xiao Mu. Arbor's almond-shaped eyes widened slightly. He simply couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was he dreaming? Jojo. Seeing that she was in a daze, Prince Mo rushed forward and pulled her into his arms. He raised his hand and patted her fluffy head, letting out a long sigh. Fortunately, he didn't miss it. Chapter 1861. He was dressed in a handsome and elegant black robe, and his black hair was casually tied into a ponytail. The man in front of her had a pair of phoenix eyes and a smile on his lips as he stared fixedly at her. It was as if time and years had stopped at this moment. At the same time, it was as if all her thoughts were drowned in his gentle phoenix eyes. She stared at it deeply, and at that moment, she discovered that her breathing was about to stop. Arbor blinked and suddenly reached out two little fingers to pinch Prince Mo's handsome face. She snorted and muttered to herself, "Divine sense. Go away, go away." Prince Mo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He raised his phoenix eyes and looked at the little fellow in front of him with a smile. Didn't disappear? Xiao Mu was taken aback, and she reached out to rub his face. The more she touched it, the more she felt that it was very nice to the touch. Her small face that was as white as snow also slowly relaxed from its original taut and serious state, blossoming into a gorgeous smile. Emolien. So it wasn't an illusion, it wasn't a daydream or even a blur. It was, the crown prince had really returned to her side. Arbor reached out and hugged him, her little head rubbing against his chest. Prince Mo's heart almost melted from her rubbing. Of course, he was also overjoyed by her sudden smile. He reached out and rubbed her head, saying softly, "Did you miss me?" Arbor nodded her little head vigorously. Yes. Hugs, hugs, she could finally hug her lotus. I also think of my Jojo all the time. Emolien sighed softly and hugged his little body tightly. Jojo, look, I didn't go back on our May promise, right? Xiao Mu counted with her fingers. Indeed, there was still a little less than half a month before the 5-month deadline. Is there a reward? Prince Mo blinked and asked. Arbor raised her head and cupped his cheek. She thought for a moment. This person's proud expression showed that he wanted to ask for a kiss. That would fulfill his wish that it had been so long, and she also wanted to kiss him. The little guy leaned his head forward and was about to kiss the satisfied Prince Mo's lips. Cough, cough, cough. A burst of light coughing suddenly interrupted the charming atmosphere between the two of them. Arbor quickly turned his little head and looked at a person not far away. He was still dressed in red and had long hair. There was a trace of laziness on his handsome face. The only difference was that this guy didn't have an umbrella today, and even tied up his hair. Compared to his previous lazy appearance, His whole body now had a bit more of a sword-like aura. That pair of charming and enchanting eyes looked at her with a smile that was filled with a trace of ridicule. Rotten peach blossom? Arbor's eyes lit up. He turned around and wanted to run to that person's side. When the venerable peach blossom immortal saw the little fellow's enthusiasm, he happily extended his hands. On the other hand, Dao Wuji almost burst out laughing. Rotten peach blossoms, did he hear wrongly? Before Arbor could run 2 steps, she was caught by Prince Mo and pulled back to his side. Prince Mo glanced at Yuan Shurchen in annoyance. He raised Jojo's little hand and shook it at Yuan Shurchen. He leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Hey, you can just greet him like this. You don't have to run over." The venerable peach blossom immortal harumphed and walked over to Arbor. He reached out and patted her head. "Jojo, are you in trouble?" Arbor immediately thought of the old man with rosacea. Chapter 1862. She immediately thought of the old man with the rosacea nose. Just now, she had activated the ghost-subduing talisman and summoned a ghost spirit. Arbor hurriedly turned around and saw the old man in the middle of dozens of confinement talisman arrays. He was waving his hands and struggling with something with all his might. Mo Lien, Hechen, Little Tai Sui, and the others all had traces of astonishment in their eyes. Arbor, how baffling! She only saw that the old man with the rosacea nose was tugging at something like a madman. The bearded old man's body was already floating horizontally. Half of his body was grabbed by the old man with the rosacea nose, while the other half seemed to be tightly clamped down by a force. The bearded old man's face was already showing a pained and horrified expression. He kept feeling that if this continued, he would be directly torn apart by the 2 forces. Amazing! Mata couldn't help but click his tongue. Duan Muqing, Qi Xianxian, and Little Fatty's gazes also moved from the old man with the rosacea nose to Mo Lien, Hechen, and the other outstanding men and women. Were all Jojo's friends? Duan Muqing didn't understand where the disappointment in his heart came from. He kept feeling that after interacting with Jojo for a while, he didn't treat any of the team members the way he treated himself. Every time their eyes met, the little fellow would be like a frightened rabbit and immediately look away. When they interacted, she always seemed to have a faint sense of alienation towards him. But Duan Muqing really didn't understand. He looked at the scene in front of him again. The little girl was leaning against the man who was extremely outstanding in both appearance and temperament. Her eyes flashed with the light of joy. Duan Muqing's heart couldn't help but sink inch by inch. It wasn't the same, that it was completely different. The bearded old man's ear-piercing screams caused Duan Muqing's emotions to settle down slightly. He raised his eyes and looked forward. He saw that the bearded old man's left hand had already been torn off by that powerful ghost spirit. Everyone used their spiritual senses to look. Naturally, they could see a ghost spirit wrapped in a thick black fog. This ghost spirit was much more powerful than any small ghost spirit he had seen in the past. After all, he had held on for so long in the hands of a 7th-level God Realm expert and had yet to be defeated. In fact, he even faintly had the upper hand. Of course, it was also because the red-nosed old man's spiritual energy attacks had all missed. When fighting with ghosts, Talisman Master's attacks could turn into substantial effects. Most people would be at a disadvantage. Rumble! In the dark night, the thunderclouds rolled, and it seemed like it was going to rain heavily. Qiao Qiao, put away that ghost spirit. I'll talk to Second Elder. Mo Lien hugged the little fellow and helplessly lowered his head to glance at her. If this continued, the old man with rosacea would suffer a huge loss. Stinking girl, stinking girl. The old man was also stomping his feet and cursing angrily. You're turning your back on us just like that, damned girl. Arbor glared at him, took a few steps forward, took out the ghost spirit pearl, and waved his hand in the direction of the old man. Come back. Everyone. Hu Shurchen couldn't help but raise her hand to cover her face. Mo Lien hurriedly took a few steps forward and turned her little hand that was aiming in one direction so that she faced the right. She pointed forward, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He's here. Dao Wuji couldn't help but laugh out loud. He crossed his arms over his chest and laughed heartily. Boss, is this your wife? Chapter 1863. She clearly can't see the ghost spirit at all. Dao Wuji teased and turned to look at Fairy Ginkgo. He originally thought he would see an angry face, but who knew that Fairy Ginkgo cupped her face in her hands like a love-struck fool. Her eyes shone brightly as she stared at the little girl with a stoic face. So pretty! If Fairy Peony hadn't been holding her back, Fairy Ginkgo would have pounced on the little girl and made a scene, begging for a hug. Dao Wuji stared at Fairy Ginkgo like he was looking at a lunatic. It seemed that Fairy Ginkgo liked both men and women. She was interested in any beautiful creature. Fairy Peony wanted nothing more than to knock her sister out with a punch. What a disgrace! On the other side, Arbor calmly put the ghost spirit back into the ghost spirit pearl and looked up to meet Mo Lien and Yuan Shurchen's puzzled gazes. You really can't see it? Yuan Shurchen couldn't help but ask. That was impossible. Looking at Jojo's current realm, he should have entered the spiritual realm. Logically speaking, as long as he spread out his spiritual awareness, he would definitely be able to see the ghost spirit. I can't see it, Arbor answered expressionlessly. Yuan Shurchen couldn't help but laugh. Those who understood this little girl knew that the more indifferent and calm she appeared on the surface, the more tangled her heart was. Looking at the strange gazes of the people around him, Jojo was a bit displeased. So what if she couldn't see the ghost spirit? Even if she couldn't see it, there was nothing she could do. Mo Lien smiled and looked down at him. When she looked up again, her sharp gaze shot toward the rose-nosed old man in front of her. Second elder. The rose-nosed old man looked deflated. He dragged the dying bearded old man and coughed lightly before gloomily walking to Mo Lien and Arbor. Your Highness. Mo Lien stared at him coldly. Did you fight with my Jojo just now? No. The rose-nosed old man hurriedly waved his hands and laughed apologetically. What a joke. He wasn't tired of living, so why would he lay his hands on a little girl? He did it. Arbor immediately exposed the old man. Just now, he continuously shattered 8 of my array glyphs. Mo Lien's face darkened. The old man with rosacea wanted to cry. He had only broken 8 of her confinement talisman arrays, but he hadn't even touched her with a single finger. He even threatened me. Arbor complained about the old man's evil deeds. He said that if I didn't let them go, he would use his ultimate move on me. Otherwise, how could I have summoned the ghost spirits to deal with him first? The little fellow looked like the guilty party complaining first. That's right, it was because the old man wanted to protect those killers. Otherwise, Jojo wouldn't be so angry. It's all the old man's fault. The old man was speechless. No, Your Highness, please listen to me. So, the rose-nosed old man felt 2 suction forces coming from his hand. He couldn't resist it for a while and the bearded old man in his hand flew out, being sucked in front of Mo Lien and Yuan Shurchen. Who is this fellow? Yuan Shurchen smiled and looked up at the old man covered in sweat. If you don't say it, I'll know with a soul search. Mo Lien coldly looked at the rose-nosed old man with a hint of warning in her eyes. If this prince finds any problems, you will be responsible for covering them up. They continued at around 3:30. Chapter 1864. The old man glanced at the little guy bitterly, then hurriedly cupped his hands at Prince Emong. Your Highness, this old man is here on His Majesty's orders to clean up the mess. The old man was very skilled at selling out his teammates at critical moments. There was no other way. His Highness the Crown Prince was still angry, and the old man had to do this strenuous and unrewarding thing. It was completely the Emperor who forced him. He could only reveal everything about the Emperor. Sure enough, as soon as His Highness heard his father's name, his entire handsome face immediately darkened. He sent people to kill my Jojo? The old man hurriedly shook his head like a rattledrum. No. Your Highness, this is a complete misunderstanding. How could it be a misunderstanding? Arbor turned and waved at the little white snake and the other beasts. Move those corpses over. The old man's mouth twitched, and he weakly stretched out a hand. Very quickly, the little white snake ran over from the empty space at the side and slithered to its master's side. It raised its little snake head and its big watery eyes were filled with anger as it said, Master Silver, those corpses have been taken away by someone. They had all gathered at Arbor's side after killing the enemy, but who knew that the corpses had all been secretly moved away? Arbor was furious when he heard that, and he ruthlessly smacked the bearded old man's head with his ferrule. He turned and roared angrily at the old man with rosacea. These people brought more than 200 black-clothed death warriors and many archers to surround me. If I let them go today, my name, Arbor, will be read upside down by you. With that, he raised his hand, and thousands of black poison-tailed butterflies emerged from his body and flew in all directions. Get those corpses back. Whoever dares to obstruct, kill. Arbor shouted coldly, then turned to look at the little fat squirrel and the other beasts. The other beasts understood and hurriedly chased after the poison-tailed butterflies. Don't think that you'll be fine just because you're dead. Arbor's cold gaze swept over the old man. The old man with rosacea shrank back pitifully and looked at Prince Emo for help. Prince Emo sneered at him. He opened his hand and sucked the bearded old man to his side. With a cold expression, he reached out and pressed the back of the old man's head. No, 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 don't search my soul. The bearded old man shuddered and hurriedly shouted, I'll talk. I'm the Aurora Sandlands Jing clan, Chiyo, Consecrator Chiyo. Are they Princess Jing's men? Emo Lien's eyes suddenly became extremely cold. Her pair of phoenix eyes seemed to be covered with a layer of thousand-year-old frost. She reached out and grabbed Consecrator Chiyo's neck, only to hear the other party's throat cracking sounds. High Official Chiyo stared at the young man in front of him in fear. He was clearly about to step into the deity realm, but why did he actually feel the terrifying aura of death in the hands of this young man? Outside the forest came the sound of the footsteps of the beasts. Soon, the little fat squirrel, snow leopard, giant ape and the others ran back with a few four-wheeled carts. In the giant ape's palms, there were even 10 living people with drooping heads. When Emo Lien saw so many corpses, her face turned black with anger. The Jing clan actually sent so many death warriors to kill her Jojo, they were simply tired of living. Aurora Sandland? Jing clan? Princess Jing? Every name was unfamiliar to Arbor. Turning his head to look at Emo Lien, Jojo asked with a taut face, What the hell is he talking about? Did he just make up a name to fool her? Chapter 1865. As expected, her suspicions were correct. These people weren't Clear Sky Faction's disciples. Instead, you can't kill me. Damn Princess Jing's subordinate. You can't kill. Pundit Chiyo probably thought that no one would dare to do anything to him after he said Princess Jing's name. However, with a cracked sound, his neck immediately bent down. He probably didn't understand how a youngster could so easily kill him even in death. After throwing Pundit Chiyo's corpse to the side, Emo Lien flicked her finger in disdain, and a cluster of flames landed on Pundit Chiyo's body, burning him to a crisp. The rosacea old man didn't dare to speak anymore and silently retreated a few steps with his head lowered. After the emperor received the news, he wanted him to come clean up the mess and not make things too ugly. In the end, that things still continued to develop in an extremely ugly direction. Now, there was no need for the little girl to say anything. His Highness the Crown Prince was the first to feel extremely repulsed by the Jing family. Fairy Ginkgo involuntarily chuckled and cast a provocative glance at Dao Wuji. Look, so many loyalists. They were all sent by your Princess Jing. Dao Wuji rubbed his nose. Princess Jing rose to fame more than a decade ago and has always been known for her cool-headedness and wisdom. How could she do such a brainless thing? Oh, that dead old man already admitted it himself. What, you still want to quibble on her behalf? Dao Wuji looked up at the displeased Emo Lien and coughed lightly. Boss, I still want to say something. Princess Jing isn't an idiot. This was the first time he met Boss Mo's wife, right? Due to an animal's instinct for danger, he could immediately tell that the little stoic wasn't someone to be trifled with. Princess Jing was such an intelligent woman. How could she not know the opponent's background before she made a move to kill him? Arbor's icy gaze shifted to Dao Wuji's face. For you, It was only now that she realized there were several unfamiliar faces standing behind Emolien. Fairy Ginkgo's eyes brightened, and she immediately took 2 steps forward. Twisting her slender waist, she said with a smile, "Little sister, you can call me Sister Xing. It's our first time meeting, so I don't have anything to give you. Take this ball of divine power and play with it." After saying that, he flicked his sleeve and a round transparent ball fell into Arbor's hand. Inside the ball, energy ripples slowly flowed. Blurg. Fairy Ginkgo turned her head and glared fiercely at Dao Wuji and the Luo brothers who were retching. "Fuck, you're already so old, yet you still have the face to call a 14 or 15-year-old girl little sister. How can you even say that?" The peony fairy's mouth twitched. She cupped her fists towards Arbor in a somewhat normal manner. "I'm the peony fairy. My sister's brain isn't working very well. Please forgive her." Fairy Ginkgo angrily glared at her sister. "Whose brain isn't working well?" Peony simply took a step forward and used her sleeve to block Fairy Ginkgo's mouth. She dragged her back to her original place, completely ignoring her glaring eyes. Arbor silently put the divine power ball back into his inner world. His movements were so smooth that Hushichin couldn't help but want to laugh. No matter how much Jojo disliked him, he would accept the gift. "Who are you?" Arbor expressionlessly looked at Dao Wuji and continued to ask. "Jojo, ignore them." Emolien pulled the little fellow to her side and swept a glance at Dao Wuji and the others. Chapter 1866. They're just a few idlers in the Tower of Punishment. Don't worry about them. Realization dawned on Xiao Mu, and she expressionlessly nodded. "Oh, it's your cellmate, is it?" "Cellmates?" Everyone's lips twitched. Who the hell was his cellmates? Endless Blade smiled obsequiously at the little girl. No, we recognize Boss Missouri as our boss." "What's going on? Why does this kid look even more despicable than little Tai Sui? Why does it feel so tiring to chat with her? It's like if you don't pay attention, you'll have nothing to say." Endless Blade's eyes widened slightly. He turned to look at little Tai Sui and suddenly snickered. "Little Tai Sui, didn't you say that you're going to kill Boss Mo's wife when you see her?" What he meant was, do it. Hurry up and kill her." Emolien tilted her head to look at little Tai Sui with that "do you want to die" expression on her face. Little Tai Sui silently looked up at Endless Blade, then glanced at Arbor. It suddenly reached out and pulled out a transparent Earth-type cage from its sleeve. It flicked its finger and tossed it to Arbor. "Take it and play with it. Everyone." Endless Blade. Didn't you say you were going to kill her? Why are you giving her a gift now?" Arbor reached out and caught the Earth-type cage. He looked over curiously. Inside the cage, there was a transparent little person hugging her arms like a quail in the corner. Suddenly, she jumped up and grabbed the 2 earth pillars of the dungeon. She screamed pitifully, Shurten, you heartless guy, why didn't you save me?" "Shurchen, is there something wrong with little Tai Sui? Why did it give Shurchen to Jojo as a pet? Could it be because?" Emolien wanted to give Jojo a man-eating flower, so did little Tai Sui think Shurchen could make the little girl happy as a pet? Xiao Mu shook the dungeon in her hand as she curiously gazed at the small figure wailing to the heavens. "Who is he?" "He is the original guardian of the Tower of Punishment, Dun Zhu." Hichin could not bear to look at Dun Zhu's current appearance. Arbor understood and nodded. "Isn't he the head of the prison? Why are you locked up in prison?" Everyone was speechless. When Emolien saw that everyone was giving gifts to his wife, he immediately thought of the man-eating flower. Prince Mo immediately took out the trumpet flower and handed it to Arbor. He patted her head and said, "Jojo, this is for you." Demonic plant. Xiao Mu stretched out her small hand and immediately grasped that man-eating flower in her hand. The sudden force nearly crushed the small morning glory to death. It opened its petals, revealing 2 rows of sharp and thin fangs. Arbor looked amiably at the flower in his hand and asked softly, "Can I borrow some of your poison?" No one would believe that this little thing, which was covered in poison and had fangs, was an ordinary plant-type spirit beast. This should be a very powerful demonic plant. For some reason, the little morning glory's petals actually trembled a little. Don't worry, I won't kill you. 3 shining silver needles appeared in Arbor's hand and he suddenly pierced them towards the flower. Guji! The pitiful man-eating flower spewed out a mouthful of green poison. A certain Qiao, who had already prepared it, opened a small jade jar and caught it. It immediately fell into the jade jar. Chapter 1867. If crying was of any use, the little morning glory would have been bawling by now. Why did she feel that her future was full of hardships? The little morning glory slumped listlessly on Qiao Mu's shoulder, feeling like she had no strength left in her body. Arbor glanced sideways at it and reluctantly took out a small bottle of medicinal liquid from his inner world. Here, supplement for you. Look at this useless fellow. Didn't I just take 1/10 of its poison essence? Why does it look like it's on the brink of death? Useless little thing. Miss Qiao secretly despised it, but she still fed the entire bottle of nutrient liquid to the morning glory very naturally. Rustle, rustle, rustle. The faint sound of butterflies flapping their wings could be heard. Several hundred poison-tailed butterflies flew back and circled Arbor a few times. Arbor's expression froze. He glanced indifferently at the old man with rosacea and waved his hand. Take these corpses and follow me. Wanlu Town, Shunlai Inn. When Arbor's group arrived, it was already nighttime. The Shunlai Inn's door was wide open. Jing Linyao sat at the entrance with a cup of tea in her hand. When she saw the corpses neatly arranged at the entrance, the corner of her mouth couldn't help but curve into a smile. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Jing Linyao nodded slightly at the couple who walked in hand in hand. When her gaze fell on Arbor, her eyes flashed slightly. Like lightning, a vine whip suddenly darted towards Jing Linyao's body. If it were anyone else, their expression would naturally change. However, Jing Linyao was accustomed to great winds and waves, so she calmly leaned back slightly. The vine whip swept up a gust of wind, blowing the hair by her ear. Miss Qiao leaped to Jing Linyao's side, and the wind from her fists whistled as she threw with spirit towards Jing Linyao. Dao Wuji opened his mouth, but just as he was about to say something, Crown Prince Mo shot him a cold glance, causing him to shut his mouth with a mumble. The 2 figures fought fiercely in the lobby of the inn. The tables and chairs in the lobby were instantly smashed into pieces by the spiritual power of the 2 people. The innkeeper and waiters who had already received the news were all hiding on the 2nd floor, not daring to come down. The entire lobby of the inn was filled with a suffocating murderous aura. Bang! The chair under Jing Linyao was smashed into pieces by Miss Qiao's fierce punch. Seeing that she only dodged and didn't fight back, Arbor's eyes flashed with a trace of killing intent. She raised her slender hand slightly, and hundreds of ebony blue talismans slowly rose around her. Jing Linyao's expression changed. His expression was no longer as indifferent as before, and he hurriedly reached out to stop her. Miss, please show mercy. She threw hundreds of attack talismans at Jing Linyao, which would obviously make Jing Linyao suffer, but at the same time, this unlucky inn would be in danger. A mocking sneer flitted across Qiao Mu's lips. Didn't this shop's owner already know? You'll have to pay for everything that's broken. So it didn't matter if it was destroyed. Wait! A wry smile involuntarily surfaced on Jing Linyao's lips. She cupped her hands and said, Miss, please forgive me. How about we stop and talk? There were still many other residents living on the 2nd floor of the inn. If the inn was destroyed, then what's there to talk about? Arbor sneered. You don't look like a fool to me. Hand over the main culprit. Miss. Jing Linyao reached out to stop her, but she was caught off guard by the little stoic's next move, and her complexion turned green from fright. Chapter 1868. Not only did Miss Qiao not put away the several hundred ebony blue talismans, she even threw out several hundred more to form several dozen defensive talisman arrays to encircle herself. She clearly wasn't willing to give up. Jing Linyao hurriedly said, Miss, let's talk things out. I've been waiting for you here to settle this matter. My sister was foolish and muddle-headed and offended Mississippi. The Jing family will definitely teach her a lesson. I want her dead, Arbor coldly shouted. When her icy gaze landed on Jing Linyao, even though Jing Linyao had been on the battlefield many times and was used to seeing corpses and corpses, she couldn't help but feel her heart skip a beat. What a cold gaze. That's not it. Did this little girl mean that she had to force third sister Jing Minyao to come out and accept her punishment? Are you going to hand her over or not? Arbor coldly asked. Thump, thump, thump. The innkeeper felt that the commotion downstairs was too big and couldn't bear the pressure. He struggled and stumbled down the stairs while repeatedly bowing, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Would it be possible for all of you to go outside, outside? The innkeeper trembled, worried that the inn wouldn't be safe. With such a big commotion, the residents on the second floor had long been awakened. They opened their windows and doors one by one and secretly poked their heads out to look. Arbor swept a glance at the innkeeper and tilted her head at Jing Linyao. Jing Linyao bitterly smiled and slowly walked out of the Shunlai Inn's front door through a path that everyone had opened. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Several hundred ebony blue talismans flew out and unceremoniously lined up in front of Jing Linyao. Give them to her, Arbor coldly said. The giant ape walked out of the crowd with a bang. With a swing of its arm, a dozen people who were on their last breaths were unceremoniously thrown in front of Jing Linyao. The mask covering the face of the first black-clothed man fell to the ground, revealing a palm-sized pale face. Dear Princess, please forgive me. It's Xinlan's fault. The black-clothed woman kowtowed with a bang. Arbor's small face was expressionless and cold. Jing Linyao was just about to reach out to support Xinlan when she saw the little girl spit out a vine whip and suddenly roll Xinlan to her side. She grabbed Xinlan's neck with one hand. Send people to clean up the mess? Trying your hardest to erase what your Jing clan has done. Xiao Mu's lips turned up in a mocking smile. So this is Princess Jing's way of conducting herself? Do you think that you can just forget about your mistakes and pretend that they never happened? What did she think Arbor was? A piece of trash that doesn't know how to fight back? Hand him over and let me deal with him as I see fit. Today's matter will be over. Otherwise. Arbor glanced at her coldly. Up to the heavens and down to the underworld, I'll make sure your Jing family is in chaos. Everyone silently looked at Prince Amo, who had a calm expression and a faint smile on his lips. The indulgent expression on your face is really an eyesore. For this child to have such a willful temper, it was most likely because of the Crown Prince's indulgence. Oi! Fairy Ginkgo could not help but cover her mouth and laugh. She nodded and said, That's right. You have to have a proper attitude when dealing with things. This fairy feels that what the little girl said is right. Your Jing family sent several hundred people to kill the little girl, yet you don't allow her to be angry and resist? Jing Linyao was silent for a moment, then turned to look at the Crown Prince. What did His Highness say? Do you not understand the Crown Princess's meaning? Chapter 1869. Prince Mo coldly glanced at Princess Jing. Or does the Jing family wholeheartedly want to protect a criminal? Jing Linyao. Crown Prince Mo gazed at her meaningfully before saying dryly, You'd better think carefully about the consequences of offending this Crown Prince. Jing Linyao was silent for a moment. She raised her hand and turned to the two maids who were walking out of the inn. Go invite third miss and the rest down. The first to walk out of the inn was an indifferent Jing Qiao. Anyway, this matter had nothing to do with her. It was all third sister's fault. Why not let her solve it herself? Then, Madame Jing and Jing Minyao walked out of the inn while supporting each other. Their eyes fell on Jing Linyao with a murderous glint. Jing Linyao, why are you calling us down in the middle of the night instead of sleeping? What are you up to this time? Jing Minyao loudly cursed. When she saw the group of people standing at the door, her expression changed slightly. Who are they? Madame Jing looked at Jing Linyao with vigilance. She turned to look at Arbor and the rest. Yet at this time, Jing Minyao's gaze had already landed on Emolian. Her eyes seemed to have been ignited by fireworks, brightening at once. Your Highness? She had seen the Crown Prince's portrait. Such a handsome and outstanding man. Naturally, she could recognize him from the crowd at first glance. However, the few men and women beside the Crown Prince were also very outstanding. Jing Minyao's eyes rolled and turned to look at He Jichen's face. He Jichen's lips had a faint smile as he leisurely stood at the side and looked at the front. Sigh, Jing family, if I don't let the little girl vent her anger today, it won't be good. After all, there was no fool in the world. Someone sent so many people to kill them, and they could still smile and not pursue the matter. Moreover, the little girl's character was unmoved by force or persuasion. Tiske, of all the people in the Jing family to provoke, why did they have to provoke this little fiend? Madame Jing also looked at the crown prince and recognized him at first glance. She quickly smiled and bowed, "Greetings to your highness. I am Wang Liming, the wife of the Pangu clan's patriarch in the Aurora Sandland." Before he could finish his sentence, he saw a vine whip flying through the air towards him. "Madam!" The guards on both sides turned pale with fright and hurriedly rushed forward to block the attack. Unexpectedly, the vine whip was very crafty. It swept past their feet and fiercely raised up, whipping Madame Jing's graceful and noble body. Dao Wuji's eyelids twitched. Tiske, this little girl is really ruthless. As soon as they met, she immediately whipped him with a vine whip without saying a word. It seemed like she was really angry. "Your Highness, what is the meaning of this?" Madame Jing cried out in shock and retreated a few steps. She held onto her aching waist. That place had been whipped by someone through her clothes, and she still felt a burning pain. Mo Lian naturally wouldn't lower herself to talk to this stupid woman. She coldly glanced at Jing Linyao and said, "Jing Linyao, who did it?" "Third sister, I can't protect you anymore." Princess Jing sighed. "You've seen what happened. You did such a thing, and now that others are looking for trouble, you can't blame them. As the third miss of the Pangu clan, you have to take responsibility for your mistakes. Don't implicate your parents and clansmen." "Mother, do you think I'm right?" Princess Jing said faintly and turned to look at Madame Jing. The meeting continued at 7:30 p.m. Chapter 1870. Madame Jing's face contorted slightly, and she hurriedly shielded her youngest daughter, Jing Minyao, behind her. She looked at Arbor's group with vigilance. "What do you want to do?" More than 200 corpses were tossed in front of Jing Minyao like trash, forming a small mountain of corpses. The terrifying scene before her caused Jing Minyao to turn pale with fright. She shrunk into her mother's embrace and didn't dare to make a sound. Madame Jing's face was also a bit pale, but as her mother, she had to stand firm and uphold justice for her daughter. "Everyone, let's talk things out." Clang! A half-new dagger was tossed to the side of Jing Minyao's feet, making a crisp sound. Madame Jing's hands trembled as she hugged her daughter. She looked up at the little stoic nearby in disbelief. There wasn't the slightest bit of expression on that cold face. "Commit suicide as an apology," Arbor said icily. "If you need me to do it for you, the ending might not be so beautiful." Jing Minyao, who was huddled in her mother's embrace, glared resentfully at Arbor. "What right do you have to order me to die? You bitch, do you think you can monopolize His Highness by executing me? You're too naive. His Majesty has already decreed." Prince Simo glanced at her coldly. He didn't need to do anything as one of his subordinates slapped Jing Minyao across the air, successfully shutting her up. "This woman talks too much." Mo Lian's cold gaze swept across Madame Jing and her daughter, and he instructed indifferently, "Since she doesn't have the courage to die, then why don't you take her as your wife? Luo Yang, go help her." Luo Yang, one of the Luo brothers, nodded and walked up to Madame Jing and her daughter. Madame Jing hugged her daughter and retreated several steps. She said in a fluster, "Your Highness, you can't do this. This is His Majesty's decree. Betroth the Jing family's daughter to His Highness. In other words, Your Highness shouldn't vent your anger on them. You should vent it on the main culprit, His Majesty." "Do you think that guy's decree is useful to this prince? Even if it was useful, he wouldn't burn it like this." Madame Jing's heart sank when she saw the man's disdainful attitude. "Luo Yang," the crown prince called out impatiently. Luo Yang stomped his foot on the ground. The guards who were protecting Madame Jing and her daughter were thrown off their feet and coughed violently. "Minmin." Madame Jing stretched out her hand to grab her daughter, but she caught nothing but air. She could only watch as her daughter fell into the hands of the tall man in front of her. Min Min is still young and her divine meridians have not been activated yet. How could these people have the face to bully a 20-year-old girl like this? Madame Jing gritted her teeth. Let go of my daughter. Your Highness. Even if my family's Min Min has wronged this young lady, Min Min is still young after all. There will always be areas where she doesn't handle things properly. Why should your Highness be so calculative with a little girl? Madame Jing said with conviction. Moreover, this young lady beside you doesn't look like she's injured. Arbor coldly interrupted Madame Jing's rambling. What does my injury have to do with her appearance? So she deserved to die? Could any random Tom, Dick, or Harry send hundreds of people to kill her just because they didn't like her? If she died, then she deserved it. She was lucky to be alive, so shouldn't she pursue everything that happened before? Young lady, you can't say that. Our Min Min is only 20 this year. How can you lower yourself to her level when she doesn't know any better? Chapter 1871. In the Divine Land, under the general longevity, a 20-year-old girl was really a very young girl. Madame Jing's words weren't wrong, but, I'm sorry, I'm 15 this year. Arbor coldly interrupted Madame Jing and glanced at the mother and daughter. If your daughter is still a child, then I'm still a child. Qi Xianxian covered her mouth and laughed. Qiao Qiao's cold and expressionless face was inexplicably comical and adorable. Looking at Madame Jing's shocked expression, Qi Xianxian felt that it was extremely funny. Was this Madame a retard? She actually said that her 20-year-old daughter was immature in front of Jojo and hoped that he would let her off because of her daughter's immaturity? What kind of mother would bring up what kind of daughter? Madame Jing's jaw almost dropped to the ground. That whip just now was filled with spiritual energy. She couldn't guarantee that her daughter's strength would reach such a level after she unlocked her divine meridians. This girl was only 15 years old? Madame Jing took a deep breath and looked at her daughter in Luo Yang's hand. She hurriedly turned to Emo Lien and pleaded, Your Highness, please be merciful. Our Jing family will definitely remember your Highness' kindness in the future. Emo Lien curled his lips, but when Madame Jing saw the icy chill at the corner of his mouth, she couldn't help but shudder. Luo Yang didn't need Emo Lien's order. He kicked the dagger that Arbor had tossed to the ground and pressed it against Jing Minyao's neck. Jing Minyao's face turned pale. She hadn't unlocked her divine meridians. She was just an ordinary person and couldn't resist Luo Yang. Of course, she didn't know that with Luo Yang's cultivation, even if she unlocked her divine meridians, she wouldn't be his match. Your Highness. Jing Minyao looked in Emo Lien's direction with tearful eyes, her pair of charming eyes full of pitiful pleading. So ugly. Ginkgo Fairy turned her face away and snorted. Meanwhile, little Tai Sui was looking on with great interest. He felt that it was fortunate that he had followed Mo when out of the Tower of Punishment, that godforsaken place. Otherwise, he would not have been able to experience the wonders of the world. Sure enough, the Tower of Punishment was too boring. Mo Lien pretended not to see and turned his face away. His smiling gaze followed his wife's slender figure. No, you can't kill her. My daughter. My daughter is the genius of the Jing clan. During the test, her divine power had reached level 10. This meant that within 20 years, she would definitely become a level 10 great divine master. If you dare to kill her, the Jing family will not rest until you are dead. Madame Jing's terrified gaze fell on Jing Minyao's neck. Shut up. Jing Linyao frowned. Don't talk about the Jing family. Jing Minyao was at fault in this matter. She should bear the responsibility herself. The Jing family has no obligation to pay for her stupidity. Madame Jing viciously glared at Jing Linyao. She pointed a trembling finger at her and screamed, You, it's you. You schemed to kill my Minyao. It's just her own stupidity, Jing Linyao said indifferently. Second Miss Jing Qiao leaned on the side and coldly watched the farce. Chapter 1872. She was an invisible existence in the Jing family. She had an elder sister who was good at martial arts and literature, and a younger sister who was tested to have 10th level divine power. She was just a little trash who was tested to have a 7th level spiritual power. So what if she opened her spiritual meridians? She would only be a 7th level spiritual master for the rest of her life. Unlike her elder sister, who would probably break through to the divine realm in 2 years' time. As for her younger sister, her situation was even more special. Jing Minyao hadn't opened her spiritual meridians at the age of 20. This was a special way for the aristocratic families to cultivate talents. The aristocratic families of the divine continent would select 10 or so talented people and directly use special methods to cultivate their spiritual meridians to accumulate power. When they reached a certain stage, they would help them open their spiritual meridians. They would skip the spirit realm and directly enter the divine realm after opening their spiritual meridians. Jing Qiao's heart was bitter. Behind her back, the servants secretly spread the word that Jing Qiao was most likely brought back. Otherwise, why was her talent so different from her elder sister and younger sister? Since she was young, she didn't get the love of her parents. All the benefits were given to her younger sister, Jing Minyao. Just like this time, the emperor clearly decreed that the crown prince would marry the daughter of the Jing family. Anyone with a discerning eye would know who he was referring to. But her parents tried to push this marriage to her younger sister. Jing Qiao crossed her arms and looked at the clown-like mother and daughter in front of her with a face full of ridicule. "Do you feel better now? Min Min." Madame Jing's heart-wrenching scream pulled Jing Qiao's thoughts back. She leaned against a tree at the side, a cold sneer on her lips as she looked at Jing Minyao, who was thrown back into Madame Jing's arms with her head drooping. Her talented younger sister had a bloody mark on her throat and blood spurted out. No matter how hard Madame Jing pressed it, it was useless. Jing Linyao's eyes flashed and she turned to Prince Imo. She said indifferently, "Your Highness, Linyao wants to talk to you alone." "What is it that can't be said here?" Crown Prince Imo flatly rejected Jing Linyao's words and walked up to pull back the fuming little fellow. "What the hell is that marriage contract she mentioned just now? Don't think that Jojo is stupid. Jojo is smart." Imo Lien blinked at his wife and said innocently, "How would I know? It's probably because my father wants to marry a concubine." Arbor opened his small mouth and looked at him in shock. "Is that so? What else?" Crown Prince Imo grasped her small, soft hand and squeezed it lightly. "I have been inside the Tower of Punishment the entire time. If you don't believe me, you can ask Luo Yang and the others. I'm the same as you. I don't know anything about this arranged marriage." Arbor thought about it and agreed. Imo Lien had always been locked up in prison. Naturally, he wouldn't get involved in these trivial matters. That was. Xiao Mu turned her head to look at the brandy-nosed old man who had shrunk his neck back, and a vicious glint flashed in her eyes. "Go back and tell your master that if he doesn't find it troublesome, then feel free to come and find me. Just let him consider it carefully. It's up to him if he wants to break his arms, legs, or even head. Everyone. This savage little girl." Then she reached out and tugged on Imo Lien's sleeve, forcing him to bend down. The man looked at his wife in confusion. Then, the little fellow's mouth suddenly covered his mouth. He was stunned. "Who dares to snatch it? Who will I kill?" The end of the night. Chapter 1873. Prince Imo was dazed for a moment. His phoenix eyes followed his little wifey back and forth. His emotions were fluctuating, and he felt as if he was floating in the sky. How could he break it? This was the feeling. The feeling of being in the sky, the feeling of flying. Arbor stared at the dazed crown prince and reached out to pinch his cheek. A faint trace of worry filled her heart. What should she do? Her husband couldn't withstand her flirting at all, the petrified crowd around them. How could they have never known that this little fellow had such a bold and rash action? Miss Chiao released her hand that was pinching the crown prince's cheek. When she turned her head, she happened to meet the petrified expressions of Hu Jinchen, Duan Muqing, and the rest. She was stunned for a moment. Her short-circuited nerves were suddenly reconnected, and her cold, charming face was suddenly smeared with 2 bright red blotches. Oh my God! How could she have forgotten that there were so many people around? The action of kissing the man just now, tsk, Too bold and unrestrained, too exaggerated. It was too irrational. Rationality, 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 come back quickly. Everyone had different expressions. Did this mean that they all saw it? The timid little fellow retreated back into the crown prince's embrace and buried his little face in it. It would be best if they couldn't see her. It would be best if they couldn't see her. The crown prince didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he stroked the back of her little head and whispered in her ear, "Jojo, are you sleepy?" Arbor nodded her little head vigorously and chanted in her heart, "Calm down, calm down, calm down." Strictly speaking, this wasn't strange, right? So what if she kissed her own man? This person was hers from top to bottom, from inside to outside. So what if she kissed him? Thinking of this, the little fellow caught her breath and simply pulled her head out of his embrace. She turned her head and glared warningly at the red-nosed old man. Before today, she had quite a favorable impression of this old man. What a pity! Today, her favorable impression of the old man had dropped to the negatives. The red-nosed old man. Yet how could he resolve this injustice? Being sandwiched between this young couple and the emperor really made him feel hopeless. When the crown prince carried his little wife and walked past Jing Linyao suddenly turned her head and gazed deeply at him. "Your Highness, please wait." The great emperor's decree of marriage had already spread throughout the upper 3 prefectures. Perhaps you still don't know, but this marriage is imperative. However, I can cooperate with you and help you cancel this marriage within 3 years, but you have to promise me. There's no chance. Mo Lien interrupted Jing Linyao coldly. Princess Jing was taken aback. She couldn't help but stare at the handsome man in front of her. The man raised his phoenix eyes, and an extremely cold smile appeared on his lips. "I'll give you 3 months. Before I return to the Divine Land, find the great emperor to break off the engagement and clear up the rumors. Otherwise, I don't mind annihilating the Pangu clan." Jing Linyao's expression changed. She secretly clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. This man did not listen to her suggestion at all and actually made such a decision on his own? No chance? Did he mean that he didn't even bother to put on an act? She just wanted him to put on a show in front of others? It wasn't like he was really going to marry her. You're not even willing to do that? Just how much did he not want the little girl in his arms to be wronged? God knows, she had no interest in marrying him at all. 3 months to find the great emperor to break off the engagement. She was just a princess of the Pangu clan. How could she say such words to the great emperor? Chapter 1874. If she dared to speak such nonsense to the emperor, her entire clan would be annihilated by the emperor before the crown prince could even return to the divine lands. Being caught in such a dilemma made her heart wrench in pain. She was caught in a dilemma. But the man in front of her was so calm as if nothing had happened. It was as if he didn't care about anything at all. At this moment, Madame Jing was holding her daughter who had already breathed her last. She glared at Prince Mo and Arbor with hatred. "The Jing family won't let this go," Madame Jing said with a twisted expression. "Mother." Jing Linyao's face darkened. "You can't speak for the Jing family." Madame Jing was stunned. She glared at the princess with resentment and buried her head. Hugging her daughter, she wailed, "Min Min, my poor Min Min. Min Min." Prince Mo's lips curled into a cold smile. He swept a glance at Madame Jing and said softly, "Since you don't want to settle this peacefully, then you can all die here." Jing Linyao's expression changed slightly. She suddenly stepped in front of the crown prince and said coldly, "Your Highness is wise. Jing Minyao has already paid the price for her foolish actions. If she implicates others because of this, it's a bit inexcusable." Prince Mo stared coldly at Jing Linyao for a long time. Seeing that she had no intention of backing down, he sneered, "You are indeed very bold. Your Highness is too kind." Jing Linyao bowed slightly. While the two were exchanging a few words, Madame Jing had already left with Jing Minyao in her arms. Xiao Mu couldn't resist giving them a few more curious glances when she saw their hurried departing figure. Jing Linyao seemed to have thought of something. Her eyes flickered and she bowed to the crown prince. "Linyao will take her leave first. Princess Jing." The little girl's crisp voice entered Jing Linyao's ears, causing her to stop in her tracks. Turning to look at Miss Chiao's cold and lonely eyes, Jing Linyao's heart skipped a beat. The little girl's eyes were so clear that they seemed to be able to see the deepest part of a person's heart. Jing Linyao couldn't help but wonder if she had nowhere to hide in front of this little girl. "What orders do you have for me? Are you blind?" Mo Lien glanced at Jing Linyao. "This is my crown princess." Jing Linyao silently lowered her neck and bowed solemnly. "Greetings, crown princess. What instructions do you have for me, crown princess?" Arbor's cold eyes fell on Jing Linyao for a long time before he said indifferently, "Remember, you owe me a favor." Jing Linyao raised her eyebrows slightly, and her heart inexplicably thumped. This little girl was so intelligent. Not only was her cultivation base more courageous than others, but even her scheming was something she had never expected. Prince Mo didn't look at Jing Linyao anymore and walked into the inn with his wife in his arms. Little Tai Sui, Dao Wuji, Duanmu Qing, Qi Shenshen, and the others naturally filed in. They had been stirring up the middle of the night. Shouldn't they be resting now? The innkeeper gloomily watched this group of fiends walk in. How could he dare to tarry? He hastily opened up all the empty rooms in the inn and called over a few frightened servants to wait on them. Standing alone at the inn's entrance, the sorrowful old man with rosacea felt his heart turn cold under the cold wind of early December. "Go back and tell your emperor that there is no engagement. We won't admit it. Tell him to scram." These were the last words the little girl left for him. Chapter 1875. He felt that something bad would happen if this continued. The great emperor and the young couple were already in such a deadlock before they even met. Would he be any better off when they met? Boo-hooed, she seemed powerless from beginning to end. The seed of hatred had probably been planted in the little girl's heart. Tap, 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 tap. A group of people walked through the corridor on the second floor. After a long time, everyone returned to their rooms. There was no more sound. The noisy corridor instantly quieted down. However, the guests who had been woken up were not sleepy at all. They merely closed their doors tightly and did not dare to look around. In the first room on the left on the second floor, Jiang Qi heaved a sigh of relief. He walked to the table and said to the other 5 senior and junior sisters, "It's fine now." Senior sister Yu Gui nodded and said, "Everyone be careful. It's not good to cause trouble outside. Sleep for another 4 hours. We'll leave immediately at daybreak." Everyone responded in a low voice. They did not return to their rooms. Instead, they each found a place to sleep with their clothes on. How could they not have heard such a huge commotion earlier? However, it was not appropriate for them to go out when the experts were fighting outside. Now that it was finally quiet, everyone just wanted to rest quickly and rush to Mount Dai Zong as soon as possible. However, they did not know what they had missed in that room. Mo Lien kicked the door open, hugged the little fellow, and kissed her. Miss Chiao was very reluctant to part with Mo Lien after not seeing him for so long. She reached out and hugged him, rolling in his arms. "What should I do? I can't see him. But when I see him, it feels so unreal. This feeling of worrying about personal gains and losses. What exactly is going on?" Prince Mo realized that his little wife was daydreaming. He simply cupped her face and rubbed her cold little nose twice. "Jojo, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about you," Arbor answered honestly. She was silently sorting out a strange emotion in her heart. Mo Lien was taken aback, but he soon revealed a hearty smile. He cupped her small face and planted a heavy kiss on her small, pouty lips. "Good girl." He raised his hand to rub her little face and led her to the table. He reached out and placed her on his lap. He rubbed his head against her slender neck and said softly, "Baby, you definitely didn't think as much as I did. Even when I went through the Tower of Punishment and passed through the illusions, you were the one I saw." "You saw me in the Tower of Punishment?" Arbor was stunned. "What am I doing?" The little fellow turned his little face and looked at him curiously. "Did I fight with you? Do you think I can beat you? Is there only fighting in your mind? Defeat me?" Prince Mo didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he reached out and rubbed her little head. With a straight face, he said, "No, You didn't fight with me. You were really busy. Mo Lien looked at her solemnly, but when he saw the curiosity written all over her face, he couldn't help but stifle his laughter. He kissed her tender little face. You're transporting gold. You were working hard. Arbor turned her head away and faced a certain someone with the back of her head. She said expressionlessly, You saw wrong. Prince Mo burst into laughter. Arbor hurriedly turned her face back. Looking at the crown prince's handsome face under the faint candlelight, her eyes lit up. This person was really good-looking. Mo Tai's phoenix eyes curved slightly. He lifted her up. How about a couple's bath? Thump. Arbor took a hit on the head and jumped to the ground. Without turning her head, she waved her hand. Wait. They continued at 7:30. Chapter 1876. Go on. The little fellow stuffed a basin into his hands and turned to trot away. The crown prince looked down at the basin that had been stuffed into his hands. The corners of his mouth twitched as he looked innocently at his wifey's back. Speechless, he carried the basin out the door and called for someone to bring his wifey's bath water. That's not it. Wifey, don't you have water spirit? Can't you just fill it with water and hubby will warm it up for you? Hubby can also give you a bath while he's at it, right? Why did he have to find a waiter to bring basin after basin of water? Don't waste your spiritual energy. His wifey expressionlessly urged a certain someone to fill the bathtub with water. Then she asked this free labor to help her carry the bathtub into the inner hall. She directly chased a certain crown prince out and happily bathed. Poor crown prince. What happened to the lovey-dovey bath we agreed on earlier? You gave me a basin and let me fill it with so much water. Does that count as bathing together? After Miss Chiao finished bathing and ran out, she saw Prince Mo sitting lazily at the table under the candlelight, wearing a white inner robe. It looked like he had already tidied himself up. Miss Chiao happily ran over and hugged him to give him a kiss. Prince Mo, wifey, don't flirt. It's very easy for something to happen in the middle of the night. Hubby isn't as strong as you think. He wasn't someone who could sit still. Especially in front of his wifey, he didn't have any self-control to speak of. Seeing his strange expression, Arbor nonchalantly pinched his face and snuggled into his arms. Sleepy? Mo Lien sighed. His slender fingers brushed the hair by her cheeks and he lowered his head to kiss her furry head. I still want to talk to you. Arbor shook her head. Mo Lien chuckled and carried her to the bed. We'll talk after you wake up. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I'll stay here with you. Big liar. How am I a big liar? Mo Lien looked at his wife speechlessly. Look, I kept my promise and came back within 5 months, didn't I? Arbor leaned against the pillow and looked at him for a while. He nodded and said, Why aren't you asleep yet? I'll fall asleep soon. I'll watch you fall asleep. You're so weird, don't tell me you're trying to trick me into falling asleep so you can slip away. Prince Mo looked at the undisguised suspicion in the little fellow's eyes and couldn't help but laugh. He raised his hand and rubbed her little face. Don't worry, your husband won't run away. Are you really going to come out of the Tower of Punishment? Arbor was still worried. He quickly got up from his bed. Could it be that he had broken out of prison or something? Then, he came out to take a breather and still had to go back in Mo Lien. However, looking at this little fellow's restless appearance, his heart was filled with joy and gratitude. He reached out to embrace this fair and tender little girl, and simply hugged her as they lay down together. I'm not lying to you, it's really out. Arbor put her arms around his neck and buried her little head in his chest. How did you come out? Was it dangerous? How could it be dangerous? Prince Mo immediately bragged awkwardly. From entering the tower to leaving, he talked about how he had smoothly passed all the obstacles and so on. He was simply bragging about his skills. It wasn't until the little fellow couldn't bear the sleepiness anymore. She opened her little mouth and fell asleep in his arms that his voice eased. After a long while, he heard the little fellow's steady breathing. Chapter 1877. Mo Lien lowered his head to kiss her ear before gently laying her down on the bed. He pulled up the blanket and gently covered her with it. It was only after stroking her small hand that he got up to put on his coat and dashed out the door like a bolt of lightning. Outside the inn, a cold crescent moon hung high in the sky. Mo Lien's figure had just appeared in the night when a black shadow landed beside him. Master, Madame Jing took her 2 daughters and used a special passage to return to the divine continent overnight. Mo Lien asked coldly, "Where's Jing Linyao?" Jing Linyao is still in Wanlu town. How dare she scheme against my Jojo? Teach her a lesson. Don't think that you can scheme against anyone in this world. When does Master plan on returning to the divine continent? What? Even you want to meddle in my business? This subordinate doesn't dare. The black shadow lowered his head in fear and trepidation before hastily saying, "This subordinate was only thinking that if Master still plans on staying in the 6 prefectures for a while, this subordinate should make arrangements. We can't let His Highness suffer by staying in such a small, run-down inn. No need. We'll leave tomorrow." Mo Lien waved her hand. "Oh, has Hui Feng found his way here?" "Not yet. When he arrives, have him lead a group of people back to the divine continent first." The black shadow was taken aback before nodding. "Yes, Master. My father seems to be very idle. Why don't you have Hui Feng and the others find something for him to do? That way, he won't have to worry about things that he doesn't need to." The subordinate's heart skipped a beat, and he hastily lowered his head. "He was the one who sent you to my side. Of course, you can also go back and inform on him first. Master, ever since Tong followed Master, I've never been disloyal." The man in black named Tong hastily knelt and thumped his chest to show his loyalty. Mo Lien's icy gaze swept over him before she nodded. "Then I'll leave this matter to you?" "Yes." This subordinate will spare no effort to contact Hui Feng and relay Master's words to him without missing a word. "Very good." Mo Lien withdrew her murderous aura and nodded. "Now you know what to do." "Yes. Don't worry, Master, I'll do it right away." Watching the black-clothed person's figure disappear into the night with the wind, Mo Lien's lips curled up in a sneer. "Jing Linyao, you are smart, but you are still not smart enough." At the same time, in a very ordinary house in Wanlu town, Jing Linyao sat at the table by the window, flipping through the information in her hand. "Prince, since Madame had rushed back to the divine land in such a hurry, she must have gone to tell the clan leader about this. Is it really okay if we don't hurry back? What's wrong with that?" Jing Linyao said lightly. "Madame will definitely add fuel to the fire in front of the clan leader and push all the blame to you, Princess." Jing Linyao curled her thin lips sarcastically. "Even if she doesn't push everything to me, will Father believe me? It's not the first time he's wronged me. You'll get used to it." Jing Linyao set down the teacup in her hand and burned the information into ashes in the candlelight. "Do you think Wang Liming is in such a hurry to go back just to complain to Father?" Jing Linyao gently flicked the wick of the candle and turned to look at the maidservant beside her. She said with a faint smile, "She's going to ask Father to save her life." Save her life? Whose life was to be saved? That went without saying. Chapter 1878. The maid's eyes widened. "Princess? What do you mean? Can Third Miss be saved?" "It can't be. That dagger, she saw it clearly. It was right at the neck. Blood spurted out like this. How could she be saved? Even the best doctor wouldn't be able to do that." Princess Jing didn't say much. She just glanced at her indifferently. "You can leave." Of course, she wouldn't tell this maid that her Jing family had a divine weapon called the Soul Congregation Bell. Not to mention a person who had died a few hours ago, it could gather the soul and reverse the yin and yang of heaven and earth to save the person. Even if a person had died 10 or 20 years ago, it might still be able to save them. This Soul Congregation Bell could only be used 3 times. It was said that it had been used once. If it was used to save her third sister, then it would be the second time. Princess Jing's lips curled into a mocking smile. She squeezed the cup in her hand and crushed it into pieces. If Third Miss died again, perhaps even the Soul Congregation Bell wouldn't be able to save her. All her previous efforts would be wasted, but it wasn't all wasted. Before she took action, she already knew it. Xiao San might not really die this time, but Xiao San's death would definitely disrupt their plans and buy her some precious time. But the crown princess, that little girl, was too smart. She could see through her plan with one glance. She didn't even tell her closest maid, Lan, about this plan. From the moment she received the marriage decree from the emperor, she had been plotting against Jing Minyao's life. She knew that with her father's love for her, he would definitely make her hand over this good marriage to her younger sister. Sure enough, everything was going according to her plan. This idiot, as long as she leaked a bit of information to her, she would send someone to assassinate the little crown princess. Did she really send someone to stop this idiot from assassinating her? Did she really want to clean up this idiot's mess? Of course not. Everything was a show. But everyone was in the show and only a few people could see it clearly. In the Divine Land, it was too easy to investigate a mere mortal from the lower realm. Of course, Jing Linyao had investigated Xiao Mu and knew that she was out of the ordinary. However, all the rumors were merely stiff words on a piece of paper before she truly faced her. Only today that when she truly faced Arbor, she truly felt the chilling pressure. Only then did she realize that the little crown princess in front of her might not be as useful as she had imagined. Using the crown princess as a tool to get rid of the favored stepsister would make him owe her a favor. Jing Linyao felt that she somewhat admired this little girl. For a little girl from the lower realm to be able to reach such a level of cultivation at such a young age, it was definitely not something that could be achieved by luck alone. Bang! While he was thinking, the door of the residence was broken into. A group of more than 30 men in black appeared at the door and stared at Jing Linyao with murderous eyes. You seem to be late. Jing Linyao was not flustered at all. She only raised her hand to stroke the hair on her temples. Under the flickering gaze of the leader of the black-clothed men, she suddenly pulled out a short blade from her waist and forcefully made 3 cuts on her wrist. Take this as Lin Yao's apology. Lin Yao will remember that I owe the crown princess a favor. Princess! Lan and the others heard the news and exclaimed. Princess Jing's lips curled into a faint smile. She sat calmly under the flickering candlelight, looking at them with indifferent eyes. The 6th watch ended. Chapter 1879. The men in black probably didn't expect Princess Jing to be so decisive. They were stunned for a moment. Princess Jing put down the sharp blade in her hand and smiled at the uninvited guests. The leader of the men in black glanced at the 3 deep wounds on her arm and nodded. He waved his hand and led his men away. Your Highness! Your Highness! Lan and the others quickly surrounded her and hurriedly treated her wounds. Your Highness! The maids couldn't help but shed tears. Don't cry. Princess Jing said faintly, as if she didn't care at all. This is how the world works. It's the law of the jungle. If she hadn't made a prompt decision today, her injuries might have been worse. She wouldn't resent anyone. She could only blame herself for being useless and not smart enough to be guessed by others. In the future, she would be more careful and work harder to strengthen herself until no one could easily hurt her. The next morning, Yu Gui led her junior sisters and left the town before dawn. They hurried to Mount Dai Zong, planning to meet up with the other 6 from the school. This time, the Heavenly Bestow School sent out 12 people. They were supposed to set off together. Yu Gui and the other 5 had to rush to Wanlu town to meet up with Yang Shirong and the others. Therefore, they were separated from the other 6 for a while and found a reason to make do with it. Yu Gui and the others had told Yang Shirong that the people in the school were nice and the students got along well. But in fact, most of it was just words of comfort. They didn't have a good time in the school. After all, Yu Gui and the others had very ordinary backgrounds. They were almost invisible in the school where there were many influential people. This time, the other team that entered the mountain with Yu Gui's team was actually not in sync with Yu Gui's team. Usually, there would be some friction between them, but it was just a small conflict. Therefore, when Yu Gui and the others left the school first and hurried to Mount Dai Zong, the leading teacher didn't say much, although he didn't look worried. The 2 teams didn't get along well. It would be troublesome if they forced themselves to stay together. It was better to go separately and meet up at Mount Dai Zong. There would be less friction on the way. After Yu Gui and the others left, it took a while before the inn's lobby began to bustle with activity. Guests came down from the second floor one after another. Some were eating, some were drinking, and some were drinking tea. It was as if the big commotion last night had happened in a dream. Miss Chiao slept all the way until noon. Only then did she roll around a few times and open her sleepy eyes. When he raised his head, he saw Prince Mo's helpless gaze. Arbor blinked and stretched out her arms. The Crown Prince picked her up. "My Jojo is really good at sleeping," Prince said with a smile. "How long has it been since you had a good sleep?" She didn't know why she slept so deeply last night. Arbor looked at him suspiciously. "Did you use the drug on me?" Emolien shook her head. "Oh, that was probably because he was back. She could sleep peacefully." Arbor washed up and looked up at Crown Prince. He reached out and pressed his little belly, saying crisply, "I'm hungry." Crown Prince couldn't help but laugh. He led her to the door. "What do you want to eat?" Compared to Arbor and Prince Mo's late arrival, He Chen, the Peony Fairy, Dao Wuji, Qi Xianxian, Duan Muqing, and the others had already gotten up. They had eaten breakfast and waited for a long time. Chapter 1881. Emolien looked at the plate of white steamed buns with disdain. He reached out to take the steamed bun from Arbor's little hand and threw it back on the table. "Jojo, let's go back to the room and cook porridge for you." Tutor Wei Wei was so angry that his nose almost went crooked. He shouted at the two of them as they walked away, "We're leaving soon." "Cooking porridge? Your tutor is so hot-tempered. I'm scared." Emolien hugged the little fellow's waist and whispered in her ear, "Don't be scared. If he dares to yell at you, I'll beat him to death." Arbor also comforted her in a low voice. However, everyone present had excellent hearing, so they could naturally hear the conversation between the two of them. Tutor Wei Wei's face darkened even more. Yuan Shurchen looked at Prince Mo's back with disdain. "Shameless. Looks like we have to go back to the room to pack up and get ready to leave." Ginkgo Fairy giggled. "Everyone, that I'm just asking you, what the hell is there to pack up? Who here didn't have an inner world? Who would carry a bag with them?" The two of them went back to the room. Emolien patted Arbor's little head and said with heartache, "Jojo, you haven't been eating well and sleeping well lately. Look at you, you've lost a lot of weight." Arbor touched his little face. Strange, he didn't feel that he had lost weight. "The food in this inn is terrible." As Emolien spoke, he took out 2 vegetarian and 2 meat dishes from his inner world. He also took out a pot of sparkling, fragrant and delicious rice and a pot of pork rib soup. Just as he finished setting out the dishes, the door was pushed open. Yuan Shurchen slipped in and rolled his eyes at the two of them. "Can you bear to leave me alone downstairs to eat coarse steamed buns?" He knew that this guy was busy cooking for Jojo in the backyard early in the morning. He even pretended to be serious and pulled Jojo upstairs. How petty! She had just cooked a meal for Jojo and himself. Emolien rolled her eyes. Arbor moved to the side and looked at Yuan Shurchen with a rare amiable expression. "Peach Blossom, how are you doing in the Tower of Punishment?" "Of course it's not good at all," Ma Shurchen said angrily. "There's no wine or food. I don't know how I've survived." After saying that, her beautiful eyes glanced pitifully at Arbor. "Then do you want to go to Paradise Planet and play with little water for a while?" Arbor asked softly. "Good, good, good." He Chen's eyes lit up as he nodded repeatedly. "Not good." Emolien glanced at him in annoyance. She scooped a big bowl of rice and stuffed it into his hand. "Finish eating and get lost. Don't disturb them. You sneaked up with us and suddenly disappeared. How are you going to tell the others?" He Chen pursed his lips and glanced at Arbor. "Jojo, if I'm tired after going to Mount Daizong, you can take me in." Prince Mo's handsome face darkened. "You should get back to the holy region as soon as possible." This shameless guy dared to act coquettishly in front of his Jojo. As expected, he couldn't be at ease without looking at him. He-Chen shook his head hard. His voice was very resolute. He had already passed through the Tower of Punishment. Why should he continue to suffer in that broken place with no wine and no meat? "Jojo, summon him back." Arbor blinked his big eyes. Summon him back? Could a summoning talisman summon an immortal supremacy expert back? Arbor held a small bowl of rice and watched helplessly as the two men fought back and forth. He couldn't help but sigh. 7:30 p.m. Chapter 1882. Looking up at the roof, Arbor thought to himself, where there are men, there will be men. These two men, their words were like knives and swords. It was really worrying. Jojo is the best. Jojo never quarrels with others. During the meal, Arbor ate calmly as the two men attacked each other with their chopsticks. More than an hour later. Dong 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 dong. Looking at the three people coming down from upstairs, Instructor Wei Wei's eyes were filled with anger. More than half a day had already been wasted. Can't these naughty kids participate in the competition properly? Okay, everyone is ready. Let's go now. Seeing Instructor Wei Wei's angry face, Qi Xianxian hurried to smooth things over. Everyone agreed. Instructor Wei's face softened a little. He glanced at Arbor, who was standing with Prince Emo and He Chen, and shouted, "Come here." Miss Chiao obediently trotted to the instructor's side with the blue and white cloth bag in her arms. Endless Blade couldn't help but ask curiously, "Boss, why are you holding a bag?" "She's the wife of the big family." Nowadays, there are still people who bring bags into the mountain. Xiao Mu cast him a glance and harumphed. She simply couldn't be bothered to acknowledge him with the back of her head facing him. Seeing this, the corners of little Taisue's mouth curled up slightly, and he secretly glanced at Dao Wuji. "You're not popular anywhere you go." Endless Blade, "Duh. Master, little master. Actually, I don't dislike the body of the girl yesterday." Dun Zhu, who was locked in the dungeon, lay on Arbor's shoulder with her eyes shining. "Why don't we use that body? You don't dislike it because it's a woman, but I dislike it because it's disgusting to my eyes," Arbor said coldly. Dun Zhu pursed her lips and firmly grasped the dungeon with her two thin little hands. "Master, when will you find me a beautiful body? It's best if it's not missing an arm or a leg. It's best if it's beautiful. It's best if it's not dead for too long. What if it rots or turns into a corpse?" He was just a soul floating all the way, which was very inconvenient for him to move around. Xiao Mu cast him a sidelong glance before directly yanking that dungeon off her shoulder and tossing it towards Paradise Planet. Naggy people don't have a good ending. Everyone, you don't know Jojo well. How can she listen to you talk so much in front of Jojo? Everyone got on Instructor Wei's flying centipede again and left the town for Mount Dai Zone. Will these people be going in with us later? Zhou Danjin cast a glance at Emo Lien and the others behind him. What identities will they be using to go in? Teacher. Everlasting Blade crossed his arms and smiled nonchalantly. Zhou Danjin was about to go crazy. Our academy only has 8 students. Originally, there were 5 instructors, and now there are 9 of you. Do you think it's believable for a student team to send 14 teachers to follow them? Why not? It's because the students are precious that we have so many instructors. Endless Blade curled his lips. Emo Lien nodded in agreement with Endless Blade, which was rare. It's impossible for there to be no supervisors during the assessment. We're just there to serve as a foil. Wei. He didn't want to talk to these people. When we get to Mount Dai Zone, don't talk so much. Zhou Danjin said angrily. Wei snorted and turned around, only to find Emo Lien floating to Miss Chiao again. Chapter 1883. Wei's eyes twitched at the sight of the two of them holding each other's hands intimately. He patted the flying centipede's head. The centipede hissed and suddenly sped up. The sudden acceleration caused everyone's bodies to lean forward and backward. Endless Blade, who was still looking at the scenery below, was almost thrown off by the flying centipede. He hurriedly shouted, Hey, fly better, fly better." The flying centipede swung its body and flew over the long town. Everyone looked back and saw that Wanlu town had become a small black dot in their eyes. As night approached, Arbor and the others finally saw the majestic Mount Dai Zone. The mountain ranges rose and fell continuously. The Heavenly Academy had its back to Mount Dai Zone. Looking down from above, one could see the buildings in the academy rising steeply from the ground. The entire academy was shrouded in a layer of night fog. As the top academy in Poland Prefecture, the Heavenly Academy was not just a boast. The academy could accommodate at least 30 to 50,000 people, which was comparable to a medium-sized town. Everyone stopped at a distance from Mount Daizong and jumped off the flying centipedes one after another. So this is Mount Daizong. It looks quite majestic. The little fatty looked up at the boundless Mount Daizong and shrank his neck. Such a large mountain range is indeed a good base for raising zombies. Arbor's eyes flashed slightly. He nodded and said, "Let's go." The group quickly moved toward Mount Daizong. The gathering point should be near the entrance. We can see the instructors of the Heavenly Academy when we get there. Zhou Danjin led the group to quicken their pace. After a quarter of an hour, they saw a table on the path into the mountain. Two middle-aged instructors in black academy uniforms were sitting at the table. Zhou Danjin hurriedly stepped forward and exchanged greetings with the two instructors. The top academy of Shuntian Prefecture? One of the middle-aged instructors frowned. He raised his hand and took out a crystal shining with green light. He handed it to Zhou Danjin. "Why are you so late? Almost all the teams have entered the mountain. We were delayed by something on the way," Zhou Danjin explained with a smile. The middle-aged instructor did not say anything. He nodded and said, "This green crystal must not be lost. This is used to record the area you are in." The top academies above the 6 prefectures have formed a supervisory team. After you enter the mountain, there will be a supervising instructor following you in the dark. The data used to eliminate the zombies. After saying that, the instructor looked up at the group of more than 20 people. "How many students do you have?" The number of students in an academy cannot exceed 12. Oh, we didn't surpass them. Teacher Zhou proudly patted his chest and promised, "We only have 8 students." The middle-aged instructor from Poland Mansion's Heavenly Bestowing Academy looked at Arbor and the others. He thought to himself, "They're all a bunch of kids." Then he looked suspiciously at Emolien and the others. "They're all instructors? Why was there a child with a slightly pale face? That was also a teacher?" Right. The middle-aged instructor from the Heavenly Bestowing Academy secretly twitched his mouth and looked at them suspiciously. Why was this extremely unfamiliar top-notch academy so hilarious? Out of the 8 students in the team, there were actually more than a dozen instructors. What a weirdo! Chapter 1884. Just how worried was he about these students? Could it be that these students were still breastfeeding? That tutor mocked inwardly and waved his hand. "You can go in now. Oh, remember that the deadline is within 15 days. Calculate your own time and start counting from this moment. You can come out early, but if you come out late, Shuntian Prefecture Sunlight Academy is here to report." A voice suddenly interrupted that middle-aged tutor's words. Everyone turned their heads and looked back, only to see a group of neatly dressed people with the Sunlight Academy badge on their chests walking in front of them. Arbor couldn't bear to look at them and turned her head away. "Did you see that? This was a proper team that had come to participate in the competition, all right? They were wearing brand new Silver Academy uniforms, so neat and energetic. Unlike this group of people, each of them wore their own clothes. Fatty and Mata's cheap school uniforms were wrinkled, making them look like beggars. Compared to the others, it was obvious that their team was a proper army while theirs was a salted fish team. Suddenly, a familiar yet piercing laugh came from the crowd. "What did I see? Aren't you the 2 girls who shamelessly rejected our Sunlight Academy's elder Sue? Say, I didn't expect to meet you here. How is it? Looks like the 2 of you aren't doing very well." Arbor looked down at her clothes. It was a pale pink dress. Although it didn't have much decoration, it looked very clean. She didn't know how this person in front of her could tell that her life wasn't going well. "It's you." Qi Xianxian jumped up and pointed at the girl who mocked her and rolled her eyes. This person was the daughter of the Sunlight Academy's principal, Yu Exin. When they went to register at Sunlight Academy, this woman and another woman called He Wei stood beside her and made things difficult for them. How could Qi Xianxian forget their despicable faces? He Wei also smiled and walked up slowly. "Senior Yu Exin, don't tease them anymore. Following this, his gaze swept over the faces of the people behind Xiao Mu. He originally wanted to say something sarcastic, but when he saw Emo Lien and He Qin, he was clearly taken aback. His eyes seemed to have been sucked in by something, unable to shift away. "What are you looking at?" The peony fairy held a cluster of lightning in her hand and threw it in her palm. "Be careful that I'll blow up your eyeballs." He Wei's face darkened. He subconsciously clenched his fists and pursed his lips, but he didn't say anything. Yu Xian abhorred Xiao Mu and Qi Xianxian to the extreme. Last time at Sunlight Academy's registration point, Xiao Mu ruthlessly humiliated her. After returning, Elder Su actually complained about her in front of her father, and she was reprimanded by her father in addition to being grounded for 3 months. It truly infuriated this pampered eldest miss. Now that he saw Qi Xianxian in Arbor again, it was truly a gathering of enemies. He couldn't wait to beat them up first. The instructor from Poland Mansion's Heaven Bestowing Academy hurriedly took out a green crystal and gave it to the instructor from Sunlight Academy. "Keep this well. You can go in now." As the organizers of this elimination round, they naturally didn't want anyone to cause trouble in front of them. If you want to cause trouble, you can fight to the death when you enter the mountain. They can't do anything about it. But if you cause trouble in front of them, should they do something about it or not? Hey, do you dare to make a bet? End. Chapter 1885. Yu Xen looked at Arbor from the corner of her eye. The words that came out of her mouth were full of provocation. Arbor glanced at her from the corner of her eyes. She had a strange expression on her face. You want to bet with me? These days, there were still people who wanted to be abused. It was a strange feeling. What? You don't dare? Yu Xen looked at Arbor coldly. She looked like she would laugh at Arbor if she dared to reject her. Arbor shook her head. "What's in it for me? You look like you can't afford to lose." After saying this, Xiao Mu examined Yu Xen from head to toe with suspicion in her eyes. To be honest, she wasn't interested in a bet without a prize. If the prize wasn't to her liking, she couldn't be bothered to bet. Yu Xen shouldn't even think about doing something for free. She had always been a person who wouldn't act unless she saw an incentive. That Yu Xen's face twisted slightly. She suddenly sneered. "Just say if you dare or not." Arbor looked at her as if she was looking at a retard. After a while, she said slowly, "Deal with you? I'm not interested." The disdain in his words made Yu Xen's hair stand up in anger. Yu Xen was very dissatisfied with such a contemptuous attitude. Yu Xen felt that she was being despised from the inside out. Arbor didn't care. She didn't have much interest in playing house with Yu Xen in the first place. Arbor looked at Yu Xen coldly and didn't say anything. A silent and awkward atmosphere gradually spread among the crowd. Seeing this, Zhou Danjin hurriedly called out to everyone. "All right, it's getting late. Let's hurry up and enter the mountain." If they continued like this, it would be late at night. "Wait." Yu Xen took a step forward and blocked Arbor's path. Her originally elegant and beautiful face had changed. His face was distorted by anger, making him look somewhat ferocious. "Tell me, what kind of prize do you want?" Arbor looked at her coldly and sized her up. "I either don't play or I like to play big. Are you sure you can afford to gamble?" Such a cold gaze made Yu Xen feel a chill in her heart and a chill run down her spine. She originally thought that the prize this young lady was talking about was just some rare treasures. But now, it seemed that it wasn't the case. "Go ahead." Yu Xen braced herself and spoke. Being stared at by that pair of icy eyes, Yu Xen felt as if half of her life was about to be pierced through by that cold gaze. Arbor was cold and expressionless. "I don't think you have the courage to do that. Even if you promise me now, I don't think you're the kind of person who will keep his promise. So forget it." Yu Xen was so angry that her blood rushed to her head. She shouted angrily, "Cut the crap. Tell me your prize." "All of Sunlight Academy's properties in Shuntian Prefecture." "You're crazy." Yu Xen's eyes widened. She felt as if she had heard a fairy tale. "I knew you couldn't afford it." Arbor rolled his eyes and waved his hand. "Sorry, I never bet with poor people." Everyone was speechless. Why did he feel that this child's current appearance made him feel like he needed a beating? I don't have the right to make this decision, Uxn said angrily. Besides, I'm the one who wants to bet with you. Why are you dragging the entire Sunlight Academy down with you? Then what do you have? Arbor said impatiently. I have a casino in Shuntian Prefecture, 3 farms. Sunlight Academy's herb plantation. Chapter 1886. Uxion's face flushed bright red. The little girl's words from time to time simply made people want to suffocate. She spoke so casually that it didn't take her any effort at all. Sunlight Academy's medicinal herb cultivation base? To think that she dared to make such a big bet. Seeing her blushing and not speaking, the little girl involuntarily swept her a disdainful glance. This won't do, that won't do. Who would bet with a pauper? Scram. Everyone. Dao Wuji even looked at the grinning Prince Mo with an odd gaze. The daughter-in-law of the eldest son's family was too scary. The little stoic glanced at Uxin impatiently before turning around and walking toward Emolien's group. Zhou Danjin's mouth also twitched, and he quickly said, "Let's go. Let's go." The crowd followed the mentors noisily and headed for Dai Zong Mountain. Uxin still wanted to roar but was stopped by the Sunlight Academy's team mentor. Uxin, stop fooling around. Their team came very late, and the teams ahead of them had probably already reached the vicinity of the zombie base. Although they arrived at the same time, it was still beneficial for the operation to converge with the main group earlier. Otherwise, if they were to fight alone, they might even suffer a great loss when they encountered a gathering place of corpse puppets. Uxion's team entered the mountain forest one after another with Arbor's group and advanced on the mountain path. The night was dark, and the wind was strong in the mountains. Emolien took out a cloak from her inner world and wrapped it around Arbor. Wei Wei and the others turned a blind eye. Perhaps they were used to the two's closeness, but they felt like they were already immune to it. Zhou Danjin took out a map and pointed ahead. If we go up from here and turn around the mountain path, we should reach the gathering place. I wonder if there's still anyone there. After all, they came very late, and the first few teams might have already gone deep into Mount Dai Zone. Sure enough, when Xiao Mu and company arrived at this area's gathering place, there was no one else besides the dozen or so people from the 2 teams sleeping peacefully next to a bonfire. There were at least a few hundred teams entering the mountain this time. All the academies of the 6 prefectures, big and small, had gathered here. The elimination round of the preliminaries would eliminate a large number of people. Hearing the footsteps, the 2 night watchmen looked in the direction they came from. Both sides were unfamiliar with each other, so there was naturally no need for them to exchange pleasantries. After looking at each other for a moment, Zhou Danjin nodded to the other party. The people on duty looked at them curiously. They thought that their team was the last to arrive, but they didn't expect there to be someone even later. Just like their mentors, they were very ambitious. Rest for 4 hours. We'll set off at dawn, Zhou Danjin said. It was quite dangerous to travel at night, and they were on Mount Dai Zong of Poland Prefecture, which they were not familiar with. It was difficult to tell the direction, and their future was unknown, so there was no need to rush. Everyone hastily sat down and looked back. Prince Mo took out a thick cushion from his inner world for the little stoic to sit on. He even wrapped her in a blanket that Mentor Wei Wei knew that he would definitely have a toothache if he saw this, so he simply stopped looking at the young couple and lay down on the ground. He heard Zhou Danjin say, "Little fatty, you keep watch?" Little fatty Ko Hongwen nodded. "Yes, mentor." Zhou Danjin was satisfied. Chapter 1887. Although these students weren't very reliable, they were still quite obedient. A cluster of flames lit up a pile of tree branches. The faint light from the fire made the little girl's delicate face appear bright red. Emolien raised his hand to caress her and gently tucked the blanket around her neck. He looked up at the dark night deep in the mountain. Mount Dai Zong looked ordinary from the outside, but who knew what was hidden in the dark places of the mountain? The next morning, when the sky was just beginning to brighten, Arbor vaguely heard Instructor Zhou's shouts. He opened his eyes and vaguely saw Emolien's handsome face swaying in front of him. A low chuckle sounded beside his ear. Jojo, do you want to sleep a little longer? Xiao Mu tried her best to open her eyes, which were filled with a misty mist. He woke up immediately. Arbor sat up and coughed lightly. Morning. Mo Lien smiled and raised his hand to touch her little face. Do you want your husband to carry you? You can sleep a little longer on the way. Everyone. Instructor Wei Wei's face had completely darkened. This kid was too doting. He thought that he had completely adapted to the two's closeness, but he didn't expect that his heart was still not strong enough. UXN snorted coldly. Why did you come up the mountain when you're so weak? Arbor turned to look at her with an expression that said, none of your business. UXN gritted her teeth and angrily turned her head away. All right, we're all packed. We can set off now. Zhou Danjin ordered, and everyone stood up with him. Instructor Zhou, are we going directly to the zombie base now? Zhou Danjin frowned. The map doesn't indicate where the zombie base is. You have to find it yourselves. The instructors can't interfere. The instructors were only sent to protect the students when they were in danger. The entire process of cleaning up the zombie base had to be completed by the students themselves. Zhou Danjin turned to look at Duanmu Qing. Duanmu, you lead the team. Duanmu Qing didn't say anything and only nodded silently. Arbor and the others turned around and saw UXIN's group following them. However, there was only one mountain path here, so UXIN and the others were not really following them. After all, everyone was walking in the same direction. Coo-coo. Occasionally, the chirping of birds could be heard from the mountains. Everyone looked ahead warily. Suddenly, he heard an ear-piercing scream. Duanmu Qing, who was leading the group, remained unmoved. However, the other two groups in front of them started to stir. Coming! Little Fatty roared. Everyone looked up and saw more than 100 strange-looking corpse puppets chasing after 4 or 5 people. They were running toward them. Back off. The leader of UXIN's team protected UXIN and the other students as if they were little chicks. Zhou Danjin, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. He roared, remember to use your defensive barrier to protect yourself. Go. Little Fatty wielded his double-headed hammer and was the first to rush forward. With a clang, he smashed a corpse puppet into 2 at the waist. The 4 or 5 people who were being chased by the corpse puppets quickly turned around. One of them crouched down and rummaged through the corpse puppet's head. Seeing that there were no crystal cores, he couldn't help but pout in disappointment. He casually took out a corpse puppet's bone and stored it in his inner world. Little Fatty, Qi Xianxian, and the others cut down the corpse puppets as if they were in a no-man's land. The others picked up scraps behind them. 7:30 p.m. Chapter 1888. The Little Fatty, Qi Xianxian, Lu Yu, and Jiang Shaoxin ran at the very front and chased after the zombies that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws as if they were chopping vegetables and melons. Xiao Mu and Mo Lien exasperatedly followed behind and exchanged exasperated glances. Arbor immediately understood Mo Lien's gaze. These idiotic people are your teammates these days? Arbor was speechless. To be honest, Little Fatty and the others were so naive that Arbor couldn't bear to look at them. A group of idiots chased after the zombies in front. The team that was chased by the zombies just now was happily picking up scraps behind them. Instructor, are we counting points based on collecting a part of the zombie's sternum? Zhou Danji nodded. Does a mutated animal count? There should be a supervisor nearby. It's fine. The zombies that Little Fatty and the others killed won't be taken advantage of by others. Usually, the supervisors wouldn't appear. However, if someone cheated or stole someone else's spoils, then it was time for them to show up. Like now. The 4 or 5 students from unknown schools were happily picking up the bones. In the blink of an eye, they saw 2 old men in black tights appear beside them. Arbor looked at the 2 old men curiously. The 2 of them waved at the 4 or 5 students and led them to the side. Since they were quite far away, Xiaomu was not in the mood to listen to what they were saying. After a while, those students walked over with drooping heads and pulled out all the bones they had just collected, throwing them all on the ground. Arbor saw this and frowned. He immediately walked over and took out a small pouch from his pocket. He shouted at them, "Hey, there are still 8 crystal cores. Hand them all over." The students' faces froze. One of them looked at Arbor with an ugly expression and said angrily, "Which school are you from?" What? When Fatty heard someone yelling at Jojo, he immediately turned around and yelled at the man who was yelling, "Just hand it over." "What are you talking about?" "We are from Shuntian Prefecture's Hippopotamus Academy. I am their leader, Shagwa," the man said in a deep voice. "Which academy are you from?" "Shut up." Arbor poked the bag in front of them impatiently and turned to look at the 2 black-clothed supervisors standing at the side. "Instructors. They stole from us. Don't we need to do something about it?" The corners of the 2 old men's mouths twitched imperceptibly. One of them coughed lightly and said, "The corpse puppet was indeed killed by you, so the spoils of war should indeed belong to you. Did you hear that?" Arbor stepped forward with a small bag. "Hurry up and put the 8 crystal nuclei inside. I won't argue with you about what happened just now." The little girl's eyes revealed such a meaning, which made the people from Hippo Academy a little angry. "Where are the 8 crystal cores?" Hippopotamus Academy's leader, Shagwa, was about to vomit blood. "From just now until now, we have only picked up 3 crystal cores." "Hey, there's no point in doing that, huh?" Qi Xianxian came over and looked at them coldly. "You dare to take responsibility for your actions and return them. This is what a gentleman should do. You all look like talented people. Don't do such despicable things." Arbor nodded and turned to look at the 2 supervisors. "Instructors. Let them return it. Everyone." The 2 black-clothed old men looked at each other helplessly. Chapter 1889. To be honest, they were only responsible for ensuring that no one cheated in the preliminaries. Of course, they didn't want to care too much about the disputes between the other students. Damn it, they weren't stewards, they had to care about everything. Just as the 2 of them were about to leave, they heard Arbor shout again, "Teachers. You guys aren't thinking of running away, right? Is that okay?" The 2 old men in black slipped and turned their heads to look at the little fellow who had a serious expression on his face. "They're thieves. If everyone was like them, taking other people's spoils of war as they please, then this competition shouldn't be held. There's no fairness at all." Qi Xianxian pointed at the people from Hippo Academy, causing their faces to darken and their expressions to become flustered and exasperated. That's right. The little fatty nodded repeatedly, and his hammer landed on a corpse puppet's head. Arbor hurriedly shouted, "Don't break the crystal cores, pick them up." The little fatty hurriedly went to pick up the corpse puppet's rotten head, and sure enough, he saw a small crystal core. Arbor turned to look at the people from Hippo Academy, and used his eyes to signal them to quickly hand over the items. The faces of the Hippo Academy students were very ugly, and one of them even shouted indignantly, "We really didn't pick up 8 crystal cores, only 3. Big liar." Arbor angrily rebuked. He raised his hand, and a stream of water twined around his hand. His cold eyes looked at them without a trace of warmth. "Don't force me to make a move." Seeing this, the 2 supervisors hurriedly scolded the Hippo Academy students. "What are you still dawdling for? Hand over the other person's things." They hadn't even entered the gathering place of the large number of corpse puppets, and this group of students was already making a ruckus. If they didn't abide by the rules, who knew how they would fight among themselves? The shouts of the supervisors made the people from Hippo Academy feel especially sullen. They dared to swear on their 18 generations of ancestors that this fair and tender expressionless face in front of them was a big liar through and through. She clearly knew that they took 3 crystal cores, but she complained to the teachers, saying that they stole 8. This time, he really went for wool and came home shorn. With sullen faces, they could only reluctantly gather the 8 crystal cores and throw them into Qiao Mu's open pouch. Arbor nodded and put the bag back on his waist. He hugged his small bundle and turned to leave. The team leader of Hippo Academy, Shagwa, became angrier the more he looked at her back. He couldn't help but roar, "Stop right there. Is there anything else?" Arbor turned to look at Shagwa, his small face expressionless. "Deadpan face, let me tell you we lost this time. Just you wait." Shagwa said angrily, unconvinced. It's a small world. There will always be a chance. Arbor glanced at him and trotted to Emolien's side. He looked up at him and asked monotonously, "Why do losers always like to say something superfluous at the end?" Emolien held her small hand with a grin. "Because they're stupid." "That's right. They're stupid." The little fellow nodded. She hugged her bundle with one hand and followed Emolien to the teachers. Wei Wei felt a toothache just looking at her. What did this child come here for? It was like she was here for a fucking sightseeing tour. Why did they let her come here to train and kill corpse puppets? Why didn't she do it? "Wait for me." Arbor suddenly patted Emolien's hand. Chapter 1890. Zhou Danjin looked at the student with gratification in her eyes. She then exchanged a glance with Wei Wei. This kid finally wants to improve himself? Arbor jogged behind Duan Muqing and the others. She took out a small pouch from her waist and picked up the crystal cores on the ground. The corners of the two supervisors' eyes twitched, and they immediately turned around and disappeared from where they were, as if what they didn't see couldn't hurt them. Arbor picked up the spoils on the ground and looked down on them. The quality of this batch of zombies is not high. There are only about 10 crystal cores among the hundreds of zombies. TSK, low quality. Zhou Danjin did not know what to say about her. She thought that this girl finally understood and wanted to join her teammates in the battle. But in the end, she was a professional at picking up scraps. Half an hour later, the battle ended. Besides Arbor's team, the teams from the other two assembly sites also joined the battle. On the other hand, Uxan and the others were protected by their leader and did not go forward to fight. Qi Xianxian looked at them curiously and laughed. "Yo, you're so spoiled and you're still hiding behind your mentor. What's the point of coming here to train? Hurry up and go home to drink milk." Everyone, Xianxian, this girl. She had already shut up, but she still had to provoke her. Uxian couldn't stand being provoked. She jumped up and said, "What did you say? There are so many people and they need so much time to kill 100 zombies. You guys are not any better. It's better than being a coward." Little Fatty turned around and snorted. Uxian flew into a rage. She pointed at Arbor and said, "She didn't do anything either, right? You didn't do anything." Miss Chiao immediately retorted. She raised the small pouch in her hand. "If I didn't do anything, would these crystal cores run into my pocket? An idiot would be an idiot." It was so tiring to say one more sentence. Everyone, Qi Xianxian laughed and ran to Arbor's side. She hugged her shoulder. "Sit. Let's not talk to idiots." Just as Uxan was about to lose her temper, she heard an earth-shaking sound coming from the depths of the forest. Everyone felt as if their ears were about to explode, and their bodies swayed left and right along with the tremors of the earth. Fuck, what the hell are those idiots doing inside? Mata didn't pay attention for a moment and was shaken into a tree. He quickly hugged the tree with one hand. Rumble! The loud sound lasted for a long time. It was as if a flat ground had exploded in the depths of the mountain forest. The shockwaves spread to their side, making everyone feel that the situation was not good. If it had been a normal spiritual energy ball, the explosion would not have caused such a huge commotion. Uxan suddenly screamed, "The ground, the ground." Everyone looked down and cursed in their hearts. What the fuck? The ground is actually cracking from the tremors. "Run!" Someone shouted, and the group of people immediately unleashed their abilities to the limit, flying towards the sky above the mountain forest. Arbor quickly swallowed a flying pill and stuffed one into Emolien's mouth. When the two of them flew into the sky, they saw Instructor Wei Wei summoning the flying centipede and calling the students up. However, this was a mountain forest after all, and the trees were lush. The flying centipede barely managed to get out, but it was almost smashed down by a few broken branches. Hover, hover, everyone hover. End of night. Chapter 1891. Everyone floated up into the air. Less than 2 seconds after they jumped onto the trees, they felt the trees shaking and falling down one by one. Arbor and Emolien held hands and jumped to a relatively empty and safe area. "Shurchen, Little Taisui, the Luo brothers, and the others had also jumped up and gathered around Arbor and Emolien. Everyone frowned slightly and looked down at the turbulent mountain range. Mata said in confusion, "How could this be? Mount Daizong didn't look so fragile. Could a random tremor flatten the entire mountain? Everyone be careful. The situation is not good." The leader of UXIN's team looked at the constantly shaking earth with a solemn expression. After leading the students into the air, he quickly said, "Let's go down the mountain to avoid the tremors first. Maybe this really wasn't caused by humans. Maybe the earth dragon turned over? Their luck was really bad." 3 small white hounds with pure white fur suddenly rushed out of the forest. Each of them was only the length of a forearm. They were very small and lively as they scurried among the crooked trees. One of the hounds suddenly pounced at UXIN's feet, who was suspended in the air. "Go away!" UXIN wouldn't let them pounce on her. She directly kicked the hound away. Woof! The hound whimpered and rolled on the ground after being kicked by UXIN. Coincidentally, a towering tree tilted down and was about to smash through the hound's intestines. The other 2 hounds pounced over and desperately pushed the previous one away. The 3 hounds rolled on the ground for several meters. They whimpered and kicked their legs to get up. They nimbly avoided the fallen tree and pounced in the direction of the people. The 3 hounds cleverly dodged UXN, who was a tough nut to crack, and rushed toward Arbor's group. Miss Chiao was speechless. Could it be that some owner brought 3 hounds up the mountain to hunt and suddenly encountered an earthquake and were forced to separate? Woof woof woof. The puppy raised its head and circled around the fallen tree. It looked up at the people of Arbor who were hanging above with pleading eyes. Qi Xuanxuan's heart immediately burst with love. She stretched out her hands and shouted, "Come, come, come into Big Sister's arms." Woof woof woof. The puppy jumped under Arbor and Emolien and barked at Arbor. Qi Xianxian, the fuck, was she being completely ignored? Little Fatty could not help but laugh out loud. He turned to look at Qi Xianxian sympathetically and said, "Even the dogs know that you're a glutton. You only like them because they look delicious." Qi Xianxian was speechless. Woof woof, woof woof woof. The 3 puppies gathered around Arbor's feet and started barking pitifully again. Arbor was speechless as he looked down at them. His gaze met everyone's gaze. Qi Xianxian nodded her chin at her. "Arbor, what did she need 3 puppies for? Not only did they not know how to work, but she also had to take care of them." The 3 puppies circled around below. From time to time, they would raise their little heads and jump around, barking pitifully at Arbor. Arbor looked at Qi Xuanxuan's eager gaze and reluctantly raised his hand. A wooden vine shot out from his hand and wrapped around the 3 puppies. Chapter 1892. Woof 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 woof. The 3 puppies leaped into Arbor's arms and shoulders. One of them even tried to pounce on her face, but she caught it with a wave of her hand. Everyone's lips twitched upon seeing this. Mata was just about to tease her when they suddenly heard a massive boom in the distance. This time, everyone stood in the air and looked into the distance. Immediately, they saw a huge tail covered in armor appear on the top of a mountain in the distance. It rolled and swept across a mountain peak. "Holy fuck, what's that?" Mata exclaimed. "It can't really be some kind of mutant dragon, right?" UXIN and the other Sunlight Academy students looked at each other and saw a hint of panic in each other's eyes. "Instructor, what do we do now?" Hiwei asked anxiously. "Let's get down the mountain first." But how could they make it in time? Everyone hovering in the air felt a burst of gravel beneath their feet. A fissure opened up in the mountain, and a powerful suction force erupted from deep underground. "Instructor." UXN lost her footing and was immediately dragged down by the suction force with a pale face. Only then did everyone realize that there was a massive hole in the mountain path beneath their feet. UXIN had been sucked into that hole. Emolien reached out and hurriedly hugged Arbor. She was just about to rise into the air. Arbor suddenly patted Emolien's arm. "Little water told me that it sensed a profound spirit jade mine down there." Emolien faltered. At this moment, the suction force was already sweeping toward them. Little Tai Sui's expression darkened. It was just about to reach out to control the suction force when Emo Lien's indifferent voice sounded in its ears. Go down. Xian Xian, be careful, everyone. Qiao Mu exhorted, but Crown Prince Emo had already jumped into the hole with her in his arms. Without Emo Lien, He Chen, and little Tai Sui to control the suction force, no one else was able to withstand it. They were all dragged down by the suction force. As soon as they entered that hole, the sounds of other people wailing and groaning could be heard everywhere. Other than Emo Lien, little Tai Sui, and the others who jumped into this hole of their own accord, the others were all pulled in by the suction force. All of them were terribly flustered and felt like they were rolling down, as if they were going to roll into the depths of the Earth's core. Holy shit! Were they going to die? Why did it feel like they couldn't get up even with their spiritual power? That suction force was simply too strong. Everything was pitch black. No one knew where they had rolled to. They just struggled there, trying harder, trying to keep themselves afloat. However, it was to no avail. Following the uneven tunnel in the dark cave, the group tumbled all the way down. It wasn't until they heard Yu Xian scream from afar that everyone's heart tightened slightly. They silently chanted Amitba several times, guessing that they were about to reach the bottom. Bang, bang, bang. Everyone rolled all the way down, eventually forming a pile of human pyramid. Emo Lien held onto Arbor and steadied herself. She, Hechen, little Tai Sui, and the others moved to the side of the tunnel. Miss Qiao heard Xuanxuan's cries coming from afar. She hurriedly stretched out her small hand and pulled Xian Xian along. Io Io! Little Fatty, who had rolled over from behind, bumped into Qi Xuanxuan's back. The two of them lost their balance and rolled on the ground, hugging each other. Duanmu Qing then flew down and stood firmly next to Emo Lien. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.